Welcome, you've arrived at my channel where every whisper holds a secret, and every silence screams in the dark. Tonight, you're not just a listener, but a witness. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and let the darkness speak. Part 1. The first science day, Ed Harland walked out of the woods. There was something in his eyes that no one had ever seen before. The small town of Pine Hollow, Arkansas, had always been quiet. People around here were used to the occasional early morning hunt, but nothing had ever felt as wrong as this. Ed wasn't the same. His clothes were torn, his skin pale like he'd been lost for days, and his eyes were hollow, like he had seen things no man should ever see. We all knew Ed and his buddies. They'd go hunting out of season, just like many others in this quiet little town. It wasn't that big of a deal, honestly. The deer population was growing, and the hunting kept things in balance. They'd go early, always before dawn, and return late, never seen by anyone until they were safely tucked back home. They were always careful, quiet, out of sight, out of mind. But this time, Ed didn't go home. He didn't sneak back into the woods under the cover of night. He walked straight down Main Street, rifle slung over his shoulder, dressed in the same hunting gear he'd worn for days, his boots covered in mud. It wasn't just the clothes that were wrong. It was how he moved, like a ghost. No one dared approach him. They just watched, some even from their windows. He didn't stop, didn't say a word to anyone. Without a word to the people who'd known him all his life, he walked into Abe Holly's little juke joint. That was the first sign something was terribly wrong. Abe was behind the bar, cleaning glasses as he always did. He looked up, saw Ed standing there, rifle still in hand. Abe didn't flinch. He just nodded and set down a bottle of whiskey. Ed didn't speak, just placed the rifle on the bar with a soft thud and took a swig straight from the bottle. His hand shook as he drank, the dark stains of blood still visible on his fingers. Abe, nervous as he was, said nothing, but his eyes darted around the room, silently begging for someone to step in. Then, Sheriff Baker walked in. He was calm, but there was a tension in the way he carried himself, like he knew something was coming, but wasn't ready to face it. "Ed, you all right?" the sheriff asked, his voice low. Steady. Ed didn't answer. His eyes were wild, and for a moment, the entire room felt like it held its breath. "The woods," Ed finally whispered, the words barely leaving his cracked lips. "The woods took them." Ed had gone hunting with his friends, Zed and Jim, like they did every season. But when the sheriff asked about them, Ed didn't mention the Bodies. The sheriff wasn't expecting to find anything. After all, the woods were vast, and anything could happen out there. Bears, coyotes, the bodies would be gone, picked clean by the time anyone made it out there. But the sheriff knew something was different this time. "I'm taking you in, Ed. We'll get to the bottom of this," Sheriff Baker said, trying to stay composed. He didn't believe Ed had killed his friends. It didn't make sense. Ed was always so friendly, so well liked. Sure, he had his moments, a temper here and there, maybe a bit too much to drink, but murder, that didn't sit right with anyone. Ed didn't resist. He just let himself be led away, quietly. No one spoke. Everyone was still too shaken by what they'd just heard. It didn't make sense. How could Ed, who had always been so warm, so familiar, suddenly snap like that? It was a terrible misunderstanding. Maybe they'd been attacked by something. Maybe they had run into trouble. Maybe it was just an accident. But people in small towns, well, they talk. And when they do, it's never kind. That night, Sheriff Baker organized a search party. They set out at dawn with bloodhounds and rifles, hoping to find something, anything that would make sense of the mess. The searchers were greeted with quiet nods, the town almost holding its breath. This wasn't just some petty domestic dispute. This was a murder, and everyone wanted answers. But when the search party returned by noon, their faces were pale. The woods had given up nothing. No bodies, no clues, just the eerie silence of the pine barrens. "That's enough," Sheriff Baker said, wiping his face with a handkerchief. "We'll send for more help. This is too big for us to handle alone." People started talking, started asking questions. What had happened to those men? Had Ed really done it? The town was in turmoil. The next morning, I was working the lunch rush at the diner when I heard the tires screech from outside. The search party had returned early. Something wasn't right. Bill Howard, the pig farmer, was in town, his truck parked outside the sheriff's office. He didn't look like himself. His face was ashen, his eyes wide with panic. I didn't know what had happened yet, but when I heard the news, my heart sank. Bill's pigs, every single one of them had been slaughtered. No bite marks, no claw marks, just their heads torn off. It was the work of someone unnatural. The pigs hadn't died from an animal attack. Bill swore they had all been decapitated, and the worst part, he hadn't heard a thing. Nothing had woken him up. Not a squeal, not a sound. As the news spread, more families began to leave, a few at first, but then more. People who'd lived in Pine Hollow for generations packed up their things, loaded their cars, and disappeared. They didn't say goodbye, they just left. My dad thought it was all nonsense, people overreacting, but my mum didn't say much. She just looked at me with a quiet fear in her eyes, something I hadn't seen before. "Mom, should we leave?" I asked that night after dinner. "What if there's something out there, something dangerous? No one is going to hurt us." "Alex," she said, her voice steady, it's just a misunderstanding. You've got your last year of high school to focus on." I wasn't so sure, but I trusted her. At least, I wanted to. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I could hear my parents arguing downstairs. Their voices were tense, but there was something else in the air. A cold, quiet fear. It was different from anything I had ever felt before. Something was coming. I couldn't explain it. I just felt it in my bones. The next day, things only got worse. Part 2. The growing darkness next day. Things didn't improve. In fact, they only seemed to spiral further into madness. The Sheriff Baker, organized another search, this time with more men, more dogs, and better equipment. But this time, he wasn't just looking for bodies, he was looking for something else, something that had begun to feel like a shadow, hanging over Pine Hollow. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had happened in the woods to Ed's friends wasn't just some freak accident or a simple murder. There was something deeper, something ancient and evil, lurking just beneath the surface. And when Bill Howard's pigs had been slaughtered, it only added fuel to that fire. It wasn't just the pigs, it was what had happened to them. Their heads had been torn off, like someone or something had done it with their bare hands. The brutality of it was beyond anything a coyote or a bear could have done. It was deliberate, it was personal. I remember seeing Bill at the diner a few days after the incident. He sat at the counter, stirring his coffee, his eyes empty, distant. "You sure it wasn't a bear?" I asked him quietly. He looked at me like I was crazy. "A bear doesn't leave bodies like that, Alex. A bear rips them apart. He paused, glancing around the room to make sure no one was listening. "These were ... human." I didn't say anything after that. I didn't know what to say. The thought of humans, actual people, doing something so horrible was almost too much to comprehend. But deep down, I knew. I had a feeling that Pine Hollow was about to face something much worse than just an angry man. It was something older, something much older. That evening, I couldn't help but overhear the whispers from the rest of the town. People were leaving. More families packed up, taking off without saying goodbye, without any real explanation. The widows, the ones who had lost their husbands in the woods, were packing up their homes too. They said they couldn't stay. Some of them were leaving because of the fear, but others were leaving because they thought they might be next. It was a chilling thought. Mom and Dad were still arguing that night. They didn't want to leave. "We couldn't just pack up and go," Dad said. "We had a life here, a home, bills to pay, families to provide for." But I could see the worry in their eyes, the unease that lingered between them. It was a tension I hadn't seen before, and it filled the house like a dark cloud, making everything feel heavier, colder. I don't know how long I lay awake that night, listening to the muffled sounds of my parents arguing downstairs. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the woods and what Ed had said. The woods took them. That line kept echoing in my head. What did that mean? What had happened to his friends? I almost thought I'd heard something from the woods. That night, something scratching at the windows. It wasn't the wind. It was too deliberate, too alive. I wanted to go check, but then I remembered what Dad had said. "Stay inside, stay safe. It's all just in your head." But the next day, everything changed. The news came late in the afternoon, just as I was finishing up some homework at the kitchen table. Bill Howard's voice on the phone was almost unrecognizable, strained and full of fear. "You have to get out," he said urgently, his voice shaky. I don't know what's happening, but you have to go. It's not just the pigs, it's worse than that. There, the line went dead. I stared at the phone for a moment, my heart racing. The air in the room suddenly felt colder, and a feeling of dread settled over me like a weight. Who was that? Mum asked, stepping into the kitchen. It was Bill. He sounded like something was wrong. I said, my voice tight with fear. He told us we need to leave. He said it's not just the pigs, it's worse. Mum's face went pale. She didn't speak, but I could see the worry in her eyes. She walked over to the window and pulled back the curtains, peering out at the streets of Pine Hollow. Everything seemed normal, peaceful even. But at WASN single quotes, even after the call, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming for us. Something that had been waiting in the dark, in the woods, in the silence. A few hours later, the sheriff's convoy came into town. It was a sight I never thought I'd see. The sheriff's SUV, flanked by several armed vehicles, rolled down Main Street in a hurried procession. Sheriff Baker didn't stop by the diner. He didn't stop by anyone's house. He went straight to the sheriff's office. I was out front, walking home from the diner, when I saw him. He stepped out of his vehicle, his face tight with fear. "Alex," he called over to me, "get your family and leave, now." "Sheriff, what's going on? What happened?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I don't have time to explain. Just go. Get as far away from here as you can," he said, his voice shaking. And just like that, the weight of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. He wasn't just scared, he was terrified. Whatever was coming, whatever had been happening in Pine Hollow, it was worse than anything I could have imagined. I ran home. By the time I got to the house, Mum and Dad were already packing, but it was too late. They were already here. I don't know how it started, but I could hear the screams from outside, coming from the woods. It was a sound I'll never forget, the sound of people, or something pretending to be people, screaming in agony. Mum pulled me inside, slamming the door shut behind me. "Get downstairs, now," she shouted, but I couldn't. I couldn't just sit there, hiding in the basement, like it was some kind of normal storm. I had to know what was going on. I had to see it for myself. I stepped out into the yard, my heart pounding in my chest. The screams were louder now, and then I saw it. There was something in the trees, something dark, moving, but it wasn't human. It didn't move like a person. It didn't make sense. I heard footsteps behind me, and before I could react, Dad grabbed my arm and pulled me back toward the house. "No," he said, his voice frantic. "Stay inside, Alex. Stay safe." We rushed back into the house, and that's when we saw it. There was a figure standing outside the window. A man, or at least, it looked like a man, but his face was wrong. It was distorted. I heard Dad swear under his breath, and then it moved. Part 3. The shadow among USD's world outside the window was distorted, like the very fabric of reality had been stretched and warped. The figure outside, standing in the yard just a few feet from our window, was no longer the man we thought it might have been. His face, if you could even call it a face, was shifting, aging. At first, it looked almost human, but then the features began to twist. Eyes bulging unnaturally, a mouth that seemed too wide, too thin, like a grotesque smile, frozen in place. His skin was the color of ash, and his body seemed to ripple, as though it was made of smoke. I froze. I couldn't breathe. For a moment, I thought I was imagining things, that it was all just a nightmare. But the screams coming from the woods told me otherwise. This was real. This was happening, and whatever that thing was, it wasn't human. Dad moved fast, slamming the curtains shut with a force that shook the frame. His breathing was ragged as he turned to us. "Stay down. Don't make a sound," he ordered. His voice, usually so calm, was laced with fear. Mom grabbed my hand, pulling me toward the basement door. "We need to go. Now," she whispered, urgently. But before we could take another step, there was a loud crash from outside. The figure had slammed his fist against the window, and I saw the glass shudder with the force of the blow. The air seemed to freeze. My heart was pounding in my chest as I glanced around. The house was suddenly too quiet, too still. I could feel the walls closing in on me. "Stay here," Dad whispered to me, pulling out his revolver from the drawer. His hands shook as he gripped the handle. "Stay with your mom. I'm going to check the perimeter. Make sure the doors are locked." He didn't wait for a response. He just moved, swiftly and silently, out of the room. Mom stood frozen beside me, her face pale, her eyes wide. We could still hear the figure outside, scratching at the window now, clawing at the wood like a beast, trying to get in. I could feel the panic rising in my chest. "What's happening? Mum, what is that thing?" She shook her head, her lips trembling. "I don't know, Alex. I don't know." There was a sudden, sharp knock on the front door. The figure outside had moved. The knock was slow, deliberate, almost as if it was trying to get our attention. "Don't answer it," Mom said, her voice barely a whisper. But it was too late. The door was already opening. I bolted to my feet, rushing to stop her. "Mom, don't." But she was already at the door, hand on the handle, pulling it open just a crack. What I saw through that crack in the door will haunt me forever. It was Ed Harland, but not Ed. His eyes were dark and hollow, just like the man we'd seen outside, his skin ashen and stretched tight across his face. He smiled, but it wasn't the same warm smile I'd seen so many times before. This was something darker, something empty. Edmond's voice cracked as she stepped back, eyes wide with shock. "What happened to you?" "I'm sorry," Ed said, his voice a low, raspy whisper. "You need to leave. It's all going to burn." Before either of us could react, he lunged forward. His hand shot out, grabbing Mum's wrist with an unnatural strength. His grip was cold, and for a second, I thought I saw his fingers stretch unnaturally, like claws. "Mom," I shouted, trying to pull her back, but Ed's grip was ironclad. "Alex, run," she screamed, her voice breaking. The words barely registered. In my mind, I was paralyzed by fear. Ed's face contorted, his lips curling back to reveal sharp teeth. It wasn't Ed. It couldn't be, but it was. With one final, desperate yank, I pulled Mum away from the door, slamming it shut with all my strength, but the door rattled against the force on the other side. "Get to the basement, now." Dad's voice broke through the panic as he appeared in the hallway. His gun was raised, but his eyes were filled with terror. "Go, now." We didn't waste a second. Mom grabbed my hand again, pulling me toward the basement stairs, but as we reached the bottom, I could hear it. The sound of scratching, the sound of Ed, or whatever had become of him, clawing at the door, trying to get in. I looked up at my mum, who was trembling beside me. I could see the fear in her eyes, but also a flicker of something else, something I didn't understand. Yet, "What's going on, Mum?" I whispered. "Why is this happening?" She opened her mouth to answer, but before she could, there was another loud bang from upstairs. The whole house shook as the door broke open. "I can't stay here," she whispered urgently. "We have to leave now. There's no time." But where would we go? Part 4. The descent into Fur didn't have much time. The house was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a prison. Every creak in the floorboards, every sound from upstairs made my heart skip a beat. It was as if the walls were alive, closing in on us, suffocating us in this terrible sense of dread. The basement, once a place to store old things and forgotten memories, now felt like our only refuge. The flickering light bulb overhead cast long, distorted shadows on the concrete floor. Could hear my mum's breath as she tried to steady herself, but her hands were shaking. The fear in her eyes mirrored my own. We had no plan. We didn't know where to go, what to do. The world outside was no longer the one we had known. It had become a nightmare, and we were stuck in the middle of it. "Mom, what's happening? What do we do now?" I asked, my voice trembling. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked over to the old metal shelving unit in the corner of the basement, her hands brushing over old jars and dusty books. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know, Alex," she said, her eyes distant. "I don't know what's happening, but we can't stay here. We have to find a way out." Her words hung in the air, heavy and terrifying. The thought of leaving the safety of the basement, the only place that felt secure, was almost unbearable. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized we couldn't hide forever. If whatever was in the woods was still out there, waiting, it wasn't going to stop just because we locked ourselves away. Suddenly, there was a sound from upstairs, a crash, followed by a guttural growl. My heart nearly stopped. "Mom, we have to go. We have to get out of here," I said, the fear breaking through my voice. "We can't just sit here and wait for it to find us." She nodded, though the worry on her face was clear. "I know, but where will we go? The roads are blocked. Everyone's leaving. There's nowhere to run." I was about to argue when we both heard it. A voice faint, almost drowned out by the storm of our own thoughts, but it was there. It was coming from upstairs. "Alex, please." It was a whisper, soft, pleading. I froze. My stomach churned. It was Ed's voice. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew it was him. His voice had been so familiar, that friendly tone, but now it sounded different, broken, distorted, like something was wrong with him. His words didn't make sense. "Mom, it's him," I whispered. "It's Ed." She looked at me, her eyes filled with both fear and confusion. "It's not Ed, Alex," she said firmly, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. The voice spoke again, this time louder. "Alex, ... come back to the woods, ... It was unmistakable now. That wasn't just Ed, that was something else, something that had taken his voice, his essence, and twisted it into something unrecognizable. "Mom, we need to get out of here," I said again, urgency flooding my voice. "We can't stay here. That's not Ed, that's not him anymore." She hesitated, then grabbed my hand. "You're right, we have to leave. We can't wait for whatever this is to come for us." But just as we made our move to head for the basement door, we heard it again. This time, it was louder, closer. The scratching, it was coming from just above us, from the ceiling. It was getting closer. I didn't know how much longer we could keep running, how much longer we could keep hiding. Whatever had taken Ed, whatever was lurking out there in the woods, it was coming for us next. We didn't make it far. As soon as we opened the basement door, we heard the sound again, but this time it was more than just scratching. It was thumping, the sound of something heavy moving across the floor. Upstairs, my mom's grip on my hand tightened. We moved swiftly, but quietly, creeping toward the door to the outside. We had to make it to the car, get out of the town anywhere but here. But as we reached the front door, the air around us shifted. It felt ... wrong. Everything felt wrong. Before we could open the door, I saw it, a figure standing in the shadow of the hallway. It wasn't Ed, it wasn't human. The figure was tall, unnaturally so. Its limbs were elongated, the fingers stretched, like twisted branches, each one ending in jagged claws. Its skin was pale and patchy, like it had been stretched too thin over brittle bones. But it was the face that terrified me the most. It was a grotesque mashup of human features, all twisted together like they didn't belong. Its eyes were completely black, no whites, no pupils, just endless dark voids staring back at me. The mouth was too wide, too thin, a gaping hole of sharp teeth that glistened in the dim light. I couldn't move. My mum pushed me behind her, instinctively protecting me, but I could see the fear in her eyes too. She knew what it was. "Stay back," she whispered to the figure, her voice barely audible. "We don't want any trouble." But the thing didn't speak. It didn't make a sound. It just reached for us. Part 5. The Beast in the Shadows. Moment. The creature moved toward us. Time seemed to slow. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat louder than the last. I could hear the blood rushing through my ears, drowning out everything else. My mum's hand was still clutching mine, but it felt like a distant memory. The creature was closer now, its long fingers stretched out like they were reaching for the very air around us. "Stay calm," Mom whispered, her voice trembling, but I could see the terror in her eyes. It was clear she was trying to reassure herself more than me. She had no idea what to do. Neither did I. We were trapped. There was nowhere to go. The creature didn't stop. It glided across the floor, its movements unnaturally smooth. As it stepped into the dim light from the kitchen, I could see it more clearly. The skin was stretched too tight across its frame, like it was a marionette being pulled by invisible strings. Its eyes were black, endless, reflecting no light. Its mouth opened wider than should have been possible, revealing rows of jagged, broken teeth. I backed away slowly, instinctively, pulling my mum with me. "What the hell is that?" I whispered, barely able to get the words out. "I don't know," she said, barely more than a breath. It's not real. It can't be." But it was real. It was very real. And it was getting closer. I turned to the door, the only way out. The front door was just a few feet away, but the creature was almost upon us now. It let out a low, guttural growl, a sound that made my skin crawl. It wasn't an animal sound, not quite. It was something else, something human, but not Alex. Mom cried, pulling me back just as the creature lunged. I stumbled, falling to the ground as it reached for me with its clawed hand. But then, as quickly as it had come, the creature stopped. It tilted its head to the side, as though it was listening to something, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I thought it was listening to me. But no, it wasn't. It was listening for something else. And that's when I heard it. The sound of something else moving. Something else was coming. My blood ran cold. The creature's head snapped toward the door. For a split second, it seemed to hesitate, its body twitching violently. Then, in a blur of motion, it turned away from us, moving toward the front door. "Mom, we need to go now," I yelled, scrambling to my feet, adrenaline pumping through my veins. But before we could make another move, the front door burst open, and in stepped someone I never thought I'd see again. It was Sheriff Baker. "Get inside, now," he barked, his face hard, his eyes frantic. The gun in his hand was steady, but his hands were shaking. Before we could react, the creature hissed, its mouth curling into a hideous grin. But the sheriff didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, leveling his weapon at the creature, and fired. The sound of the gunshot was deafening. The creature screamed a horrible, otherworldly sound that shattered the quiet of the house. It stumbled backward, falling into the darkness of the hallway, but didn't fall. Instead, it moved faster than any of us could have predicted, disappearing into the shadows. "What the hell was that?" I gasped, my voice hoarse, heart still racing. "I don't know, but we don't have time to figure it out," Sheriff Baker said, his voice grim. "We need to get out of here, now." He didn't wait for us to respond. He turned and sprinted for the door, and I followed, my mom right behind me. We didn't question him. We didn't have time for that. We just ran. The streets outside were empty, eerily silent. It was the middle of the day, but the sun seemed muted, as if the darkness had already begun to swallow it. No cars were on the road. No one was outside. Pine Hollow was dying, and we were the last to realize it. "We need to get to the sheriff's office," Sheriff Baker said, his voice tight. "There's a convoy coming, but we won't have long before everything goes to hell." We didn't ask what he meant by everything. We didn't need to. We knew as we made our way down Main Street. The town that I had known all my life seemed different. It wasn't just the abandoned cars or the empty buildings. It was the air. It felt heavy, as though the entire town was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then we heard it. A low rumble. At first, I thought it was thunder. But then it came again, and it was getting louder. Mum stopped in her tracks, turning toward the sound. "What is that?" she whispered. Sheriff Baker didn't answer. He didn't need to. His face had gone white as he looked in the direction of the sound. I followed his gaze, and then I saw it. The woods at the edge of town were alive. No, not alive. Live wasn't the right word. It was more like the trees were moving. The branches were twisting and writhing, growing in unnatural directions. The leaves fluttered violently, like something was shaking the trees from the inside. It looked like the very forest itself was awake, aware, and angry. "They're coming," Sheriff Baker muttered under his breath. "What?" I asked, barely able to breathe. He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed my arm, pulling me and Mum faster down the street. We had to get to the sheriff's office. We had to get out of town. But as we ran, I could hear it again. The growl. It wasn't just one creature. There were more. Part 6. The storm approacheth. Sound of growls grew louder as we sprinted toward the sheriff's office. My lungs burned with every breath. My legs ached, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't slow down. Whatever was coming from the woods, it wasn't human, and it wasn't going to show mercy. Behind us, the ground seemed to tremble with each step of whatever was out there. It wasn't just the trees moving. The earth itself was shifting, groaning under some unnatural weight, as though something beneath the soil was waking up. Sheriff Baker kept pushing us forward, his hand firm on my shoulder as we ran. His eyes were scanning the area constantly, looking for danger, looking for escape routes. But the only escape I could see was the sheriff's office, and I had a sinking feeling it wouldn't be enough. "Come on," the sheriff said, his voice sharp, but I could hear the tension in it. "Just a little farther." We rounded the corner of Main Street, and the sheriff's office came into view. But as soon as we saw it, we also saw something else, a figure. The tall, shadowed silhouette stood just outside the sheriff's office, barely visible in the dimming light of the afternoon. For a split second, I thought it was one of the deputies, one of the few who hadn't already fled. but then I saw it move slowly, deliberately. Its body was unnaturally long, its posture crooked, its head twisted to the side, as if it was searching for something. "Stay back," Sheriff Baker hissed, grabbing my arm and yanking me to the side. His voice was hoarse, but there was a quiet desperation in it. "Stay low." We crouched down behind a parked car, trying to keep out of sight. The figure hadn't noticed us yet, but I could feel it. The air around us felt ... wrong, heavy. The figure was close enough now that I could see the twisted shape of its head. It was one of them ... one of those things. I didn't know how many there were, but I knew this: we were running out of time. "Sheriff," I whispered, barely able to speak through the fear choking me. "What are they?" "They're not human," he said in a low, strained voice. "They've been out there, in the woods, for decades, maybe longer. Whatever happened to Ed and his friends? It's just the beginning." His words hit me like a ton of bricks. For the first time since this nightmare began, I realized the truth. Pine Hollow wasn't just being attacked, it was being consumed. "They can't be stopped?" I asked, my voice trembling. Sheriff Baker didn't answer right away. He just watched the figure, keeping low, his gun in hand. It was as if he was mentally preparing himself for what was coming next. "I don't know, Alex," he finally said, his voice dark, "but we're going to try." The figure at the sheriff's office moved again, walking toward the door, its limbs jerking in unnatural angles. It reached the door and tried the handle, but it didn't open. For a moment, everything was still. Then, with a sudden burst of force, it slammed its shoulder into the door, splintering the wood with a sickening crack. Inside the sheriff's office, there were only a few remaining deputies. They were armed, but I didn't think it would matter. "Not against that thing, go," Sheriff Baker shouted. "Now." He pulled us up from behind the car, and we started running again. But the moment we moved, the figure turned. Its black eyes locked onto us, and I felt my blood run cold. It screamed, not like a human scream, but more like the sound of something in pain, a scream that was twisted and unnatural, like the earth itself was crying out in agony. I didn't need to look back to know it was chasing us. I could hear the footsteps, heavy, fast, and relentless. "Get to the back door," Sheriff Baker shouted as we neared the sheriff's office. "Hurry." We reached the door just as the creature rounded the corner, its shape blotting out the last of the sunlight. The sheriff kicked the door open with one swift motion, and we rushed inside, slamming it shut behind us. Inside, the sheriff's office was dark and musty, with papers scattered across desks and bulletins pinned to the walls. There were only 2 deputies left, their guns drawn, eyes wide with fear. "What the hell is going on, Sheriff?" one of the deputies asked, his voice shaking. "We don't have time for that," Sheriff Baker said, his voice low but commanding. "We need to make a stand. We can't let that thing get any closer. It's just the beginning." I looked around the room, my mind racing. It felt like we were in a war zone, surrounded by danger on all sides, with no way out. The only thing left was to fight, but I had no idea how. "Sheriff," one of the deputies said, looking toward the back of the room, "we've got a problem." I followed his gaze, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The walls were moving, not like the trees outside. These walls weren't alive, but they were shifting. I could see the cracks where the wood had begun to warp and stretch, just like it had in the woods. "We're not alone," the deputy said, his voice cracking. I turned back to the sheriff, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "What do we do now?" I asked, the fear and panic rising inside me. Sheriff Baker didn't hesitate. He grabbed the shotgun from one of the deputies and handed it to me. "You protect your mother. Don't let anything through that door. Do you hear me?" I nodded, but the shaking in my hands told me everything. There was no way I could protect her. None of us could. Whatever was coming next, it wasn't something we could fight. Part 7. The last stand. Air inside the sheriff's office grew thick, heavy with the smell of sweat and fear. I could feel my pulse in my throat, hear the frantic beating of my heart in my ears. The shotgun felt foreign in my hands, too heavy, too awkward, but there was no time to second guess. The creature outside wasn't going to wait for us to get our bearings. "We need to fortify this place," Sheriff Baker said, his voice sharp, but even in the midst of it all, I could hear the exhaustion in it. His face was drawn tight, his eyes dark with the weight of what had happened. "Get anything you can, wood, nails, anything to block the windows." The two deputies sprang into action, gathering whatever they could find: chairs, tables, even filing cabinets, pushing them against the windows. The thumping outside was getting closer, louder. It felt like the walls themselves were shuddering in anticipation. I could hear the creature still pacing, but it wasn't moving away. "Alex, get to the back of the room. Help your mom, Sheriff," Baker said, pointing toward the storage area. I nodded quickly, relieved to have something to do, anything to take my mind off the terror that was creeping ever closer. Mum was standing by the door, her hands gripping her purse tightly, her knuckles white. She hadn't said a word since we entered the sheriff's office. Her eyes locked onto the door like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "Mum," I said softly as I approached her, "are you okay?" She didn't answer right away. She just stared at the door, like she was willing it to stay shut. "I don't know, Alex. I don't know if we're going to be okay," she said finally, her voice shaky. I pulled her toward the back of the room where we could hide, behind a filing cabinet. "We're going to be fine," I lied. "We just need to stick together. We'll get out of here." But I wasn't sure of that at all. The sheriff hadn't said it, but I knew. I could feel it in my gut. There was something out there in the woods that was coming for us, something we couldn't fight off, and if we didn't get out soon, we wouldn't make it out alive. The noise outside grew louder, closer. The doors rattled as something slammed into them, followed by the unmistakable sound of claws scraping against the wood. The creature wasn't just testing the door anymore. It was trying to get in. "Shut up," one of the deputies shouted. "Stay quiet." But it was too late. There was a crash, and the door exploded open, splintering under the force of the creature's impact. The sheriff's office went silent, as if the entire building had drawn a collective breath, waiting for what would happen next, and then we saw it. The creature stood in the doorway, its form towering over us. Its eyes were dark pits, swirling with madness. Its mouth opened wide, stretching impossibly far. It didn't scream this time, but its presence alone was enough to send a wave of terror crashing over us. It stepped into the room, its limbs jerking as it moved. The floor creaked under its weight, and I saw the way the shadows seemed to stretch with it, like the thing was pulling the darkness into the room. It was no longer just a man-shaped figure. It was something else, something monstrous, something that had been born of the very woods itself. Sheriff Baker's voice cut through the silence. "Steady, cold, get ready." Without thinking, I raised the shotgun, but the moment I aimed it, I froze. The creature's black eyes locked onto mine. It was as if it was looking straight into my soul, seeing everything I was, everything I feared. I couldn't move. My hands shook. I couldn't pull the trigger. "Shoot," the sheriff barked, his voice loud and demanding. "Dot." I snapped out of my trance and fired. The blast echoed through the room, deafening. The creature staggered back, but it didn't fall. It didn't even flinch. It just smiled now. It grinned, a smile that wasn't human, a smile that made my blood run cold. I fired again and again, but it didn't matter. The creature wasn't stopping. Its form was shifting, twisting, as if it was adapting to the bullets, absorbing them, changing. "Get back," Sheriff Baker shouted. "Fall back to the basement. Now." But it was already too late. The ground beneath our feet shook again. But this time, it wasn't just from the creature. I could hear more of them now, more things moving through the walls, through the ground. The other creatures had come. We had no choice but to run through the back. The sheriff ordered, and we followed him, sprinting as fast as we could toward the narrow stairwell leading down into the basement. I could hear them following us, their footsteps heavy, deliberate. We couldn't outrun them. I knew that now. The sheriff reached the bottom first, slamming the basement door shut behind us. We were all breathing heavily, gasping for air, but there was no relief. The thing was still out there, and now it was only a matter of time before they found us. Sheriff Baker looked around the basement, his eyes scanning for anything they could use. "Barricade the door. We won't last long down here, but it's better than above." We scrambled to move crates and boxes in front of the door, hoping to buy us some time, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. There was no safe place anymore. The town was lost, and the monsters from the woods were closing in. As I glanced around, I saw the same fear in my mom's eyes. She wasn't scared of the monsters outside. She was scared of what they had already done. I wasn't sure if we could survive this. Part 8. The wretched darkness basement felt cold, far colder than it had any right to be. The walls, once sturdy and solid, now seemed to close in on us, their dampness seeping through the cracks and adding to the suffocating atmosphere. Every breath I took felt shallow, and every sound in the room echoed like a death knell. The sheriff's office had fallen silent, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the quiet of something waiting, something anticipating. We had barricaded ourselves in, but I knew it wouldn't hold. It never did. We huddled together in the dark, the faint light from the single bulb above, casting long, eerie shadows against the cold concrete floor. My mother clung to me, her grip tight, as if she could anchor me to the earth itself. The sheriff and the remaining deputy were silent, both of them pacing the small room like caged animals, their eyes darting between the door, the shadows, and each other. Sheriff Baker finally broke the silence, his voice low and strained. "We can't stay down here much longer. We're trapped. But what do we do now?" I asked, my voice trembling with fear. The question was stupid. I already knew the answer. There was no doing anymore. We were waiting for the end. "We fight," he said grimly, his voice gaining a bit of strength. "We survive as long as we can, but we won't go down without a fight." His words were an attempt at reassurance, but they had no substance. How could we fight something that defied logic, that was beyond human comprehension? The deputy stood by the far corner, his back pressed against the wall as he watched the basement door. He was pale, beads of sweat on his forehead despite the chill. His gun was gripped tightly in his hands, though I doubted any of us knew how to use it effectively against what was out there. Mom finally spoke, her voice trembling but determined. "We can't just sit here. There has to be a way out, a way to fight them." "There is no way out," Sheriff Baker muttered. "The town's already lost. The woods are alive. It's all connected." His words hung in the air like a foul stench. My mind raced. The woods, alive. What did that mean? Were the trees part of this thing? Were the creatures we'd seen part of something bigger? I shook my head, pushing the thought away. There was no time to think like that. Not now. Then came the sound, a soft scratching, like claws tapping against metal. My heart leaped into my throat. I glanced over at Sheriff Baker. He was already motioning for us to stay quiet, to stay hidden. The deputy moved to the corner, taking cover behind a stack of crates. My mum and I crouched behind a large metal drum, our bodies pressed together in a desperate attempt to stay hidden. The scratching came closer, louder now. It wasn't just on the door anymore. It was coming from the walls, the ceiling, everywhere. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Whatever it wasn't just trying to break in. It was already inside. The basement seemed to pulse with a low, unnatural hum. The walls throbbed, and the shadows around us stretched and swayed, like they were alive. My mind couldn't process what was happening. How was it possible? The world had stopped making sense the moment Ed had walked back into town. "We need to move," Sheriff Baker whispered, his eyes scanning the room. "We're not safe here. The walls are moving." At first, I thought he was joking, but then I felt it. A shift in the air. The ground beneath my feet seemed to tremble, just slightly. My breath caught in my chest. "I can't." The deputy's voice cracked. He was backing away, eyes wide with terror. But Sheriff Baker moved forward, his gun raised. "Get a grip," he snapped. "We don't have the luxury of being afraid right now. This is what they want. They want us to give up." But just as he spoke, the scratching stopped, and then the silence was replaced by something worse. A low, guttural growl. From the far corner of the basement, something shifted, something large. It was like a ripple in the air, too dark to be a shadow, but just as unnatural. My mind couldn't process what I was seeing. The air seemed to warp, like it was bending around the shape in the corner. It was a blur of motion, shifting, stretching, and then it solidified, like a picture finally coming into focus. There was a figure. It was a man. No, it was something else. A twisted, mangled mockery of humanity. Its arms were unnaturally long, and its skin was pale and slick, like it was covered in oil. But it wasn't the skin that was the most terrifying part. It was its face. Its face was a mass of holes, dark pits where eyes should have been, and jagged, broken teeth that seemed to stretch farther than any mouth should. It took a slow step forward, and the floor groaned beneath its weight. The deputy's breath caught in his throat. "What the hell is that?" Before Sheriff Baker could respond, the creature lunged. I didn't think. I didn't even have time to process what was happening. All I knew was that I had to survive. The creature's clawed hands reached for us, but Sheriff Baker opened fire. The sound of the shotgun blasting was deafening, and the creature recoiled, but it didn't stop. We ran. We didn't wait. We didn't hesitate. We bolted for the back door, the only way out. The deputy didn't follow. I couldn't look back. I couldn't even think. But when we got to the back door, we stopped dead in our tracks. There was something else, something more. The walls weren't just moving. The air was thick, heavy. The ground beneath us seemed to sink and shift like quicksand. We couldn't escape. There was no way out. We're trapped, Mom whispered. Her voice was small, breaking. Oh God, we're trapped. I heard the creature behind us, but then the floor exploded. Not with debris, but with something worse. From the floor emerged hundreds of worms. They were like the ones we'd seen in the creature's flesh, only these were larger. They slithered out of the cracks in the concrete, some of them as big around as my arm, all writhing and twisting toward us. We have to go, Sheriff Baker said, his voice desperate now. He grabbed Mom's arm and pulled her toward the only remaining way out the narrow stairs leading into the storage area. We didn't have time to think. There was no time for questions. We ran, but it was too late. The basement door slammed open, and more figures stepped inside. More of the things from the woods. I thought I was going to die, but just then, there was a sound I didn't expect to hear in this nightmare. A vehicle, the roar of an engine. It was faint at first, but it grew louder. A truck, a convoy. Then, I saw it. Through the broken basement window, a glimmer of headlights. The convoy had arrived. Part 9. The final pushed roar of the engine was like a lifeline, the sound of salvation in the otherwise deathly silence. My heart hammered in my chest, and for the briefest moment, I thought we might actually get out of this alive. But even as the convoy drew closer, I knew nothing would be simple. The creatures, the darkness, the woods, they wouldn't just let us go. Not without a fight. Sheriff Baker didn't wait for the convoy to arrive. His eyes were wild, darting around the basement, calculating the walls, the floor, the ceiling. They were all alive with movement, as if the entire building was one massive creature, breathing and waiting. He grabbed my arm, pulling me away from the window. "We don't have much time," he said, his voice hoarse but firm. "We need to move fast. You follow me, no matter what. Do not stop." I nodded, but in the pit of my stomach, something felt wrong. I didn't know how the convoy was going to help us, but I had to trust the sheriff. He'd been in worse situations before, but this was different. The things we were facing, they weren't just threats. They were something far darker, something primal. The sounds of the creatures, scratching and howling, filled the air as we moved quickly toward the storage area. We ducked low, slipping through the dark hallway that led to a narrow set of stairs, the rickety wood creaking beneath our weight. I could hear my mum breathing beside me, quick, shallow breaths. She was just as scared as I was, but there was nothing we could do except keep moving. I glanced back. The basement door was wide open now, and the creatures were flooding in. They moved fast and their presence made the air grow thick, suffocating. "Sheriff," I whispered. "Where's the convoy? Where are they?" Sheriff Baker didn't answer right away. He kept his eyes ahead, his hand gripping the revolver tight, his jaw set. He was trying to lead us out of the danger, but he knew just as well as I did that the convoy wouldn't save us unless we could get to them. The growl of the creatures grew louder, like the sound of something hungry, something ravenous. We reached the top of the stairs and moved through the back door, into the alley behind the sheriff's office. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat now, pulsing with fear. The alley was dark, the shadows long and twisted, and then, as if answering our fears, I saw them. The first of the creatures emerged from the alley behind us, its silhouette almost blending with the darkness. It was tall, taller than anything I had ever seen. Its body was covered in the same twisted flesh, and its eyes, those endless black pits, shone through the darkness like two bottomless voids. "Get moving," Sheriff Baker shouted, grabbing Mum and yanking her toward the street. The sound of more creatures following us from behind was deafening now. We ran into the street, and that's when I saw it. The convoy it was pulling into Pine Hollow, the headlights cutting through the dark like a knife through the night. The truck was military grade, armored, and followed by two others, each loaded with soldiers. For the first time in what felt like hours, I felt a flicker of hope. But hope was fleeting. The moment the convoy came to a stop, a figure stepped out of the lead truck. He was dressed in military gear, his face obscured by a black visor, but I could see the gun slung over his shoulder and the sheer purpose in his movement. "Sheriff," the figure called out, his voice muffled through the visor. "Get your people in here, now." But as we ran toward the convoy, something shifted in the air. It wasn't just the creatures coming closer, it was the feeling that this was the calm before the storm. We weren't safe yet. We weren't out of the woods, not by a long shot. I didn't know who these people were, but they weren't here to rescue us. They were here for something else. And I had a terrible feeling they had been tracking us long before we even knew what was happening. "Get to the truck, now," the soldier ordered, pointing toward the armored vehicle. We didn't hesitate. We ran toward it, adrenaline pushing us forward, but the creatures were closing in fast. Just as I reached the truck, something slammed into my back, throwing me forward. I hit the cold metal of the truck hard, gasping for air. My vision blurred for a second, but I managed to scramble to my feet and get into the truck. Get in, the soldier shouted, pushing us up into the vehicle. But before we could fully climb in, one of the creatures lunged at him. Its claws slashed across his face, and he fell back with a scream. I tried to reach out, but the door slammed shut, and the truck began to move. The convoy sped down the street, leaving the soldier behind, his scream swallowed by the night. "Where are we going?" I gasped, trying to catch my breath. "What is happening? Why did you leave him?" The soldier in the truck didn't answer me right away. He just kept his eyes on the road, steering us away from the chaos that had overtaken the town. But when he did speak, his voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Things are worse than we thought. We're evacuating survivors, but that's just the beginning. The Foundation has been tracking these creatures for decades, and we've never seen anything like this. We're taking you to a facility for containment. It's the only way we can stop this. Containment," I repeated, my mind racing. "What do you mean, stop this? Are you telling me this is just the beginning?" "Exactly," he said. "We'll explain everything once we're out of Pine Hollow, but for now, just stay quiet. We need to make it to the facility before nightfall." I looked out the window, watching the town I had known my whole life fade into the distance. The creatures were still out there, still hunting, but we were leaving them behind, or so I thought. But something inside me knew this wasn't over. It was only just beginning. And whatever this was, whatever had started in Pine Hollow, was only the tip of the iceberg. Part 10. The facilitized convoy rumbled through the streets, its tires kicking up dust and gravel as we sped away from Pine Hollow. The town that had once seemed so familiar, so peaceful, was now nothing but a fading memory in the rearview mirror. And yet, the weight of what had happened, of what we had witnessed, still hung heavily in the air, suffocating me. The truck I was in was silent, except for the hum of the engine and the occasional cough or whisper between the soldiers. Mom sat beside me, her hand still gripping mine, her face pale and drawn. The fear was still there in her eyes, but there was something else now something darker. Like the weight of the unknown was too much for her to bear. I could feel it too. The soldier driving the truck kept his focus on the road ahead, but his eyes were constantly flicking to the rearview mirror. He was tense, and I could tell he was listening for something, watching for something. "How far is it?" I asked, after a long silence. The soldier didn't answer at first. He just kept driving, his hands tight on the wheel. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold, mechanical. "About an hour. We're headed to a facility just outside the city. It's the only place we can contain what's happening. But don't get comfortable. We're not safe yet. Not safe." My stomach twisted at his words. If we weren't safe now, when would we be? I wanted to ask more, but I knew better. The soldier wasn't giving us any details, and I wasn't sure. I wanted them for the next hour. The only sound was the hum of the truck's engine and the occasional radio chatter from the other vehicles in the convoy. We passed through more rural areas, abandoned farmhouses, overgrown fields, places that once felt like the heart of the country, but now felt more like a wasteland. Finally, the convoy came to a stop at a set of iron gates, standing tall and cold, like the entrance to some kind of fortress. The gates opened slowly as the convoy rolled through, and I could see the shadows of guards standing at attention, weapons at the ready. As we approached, the truck bounced slightly over the rough gravel road. My thoughts were racing. What kind of place was this? Why hadn't I heard about it before? Who were these people, and why had they been tracking us? When we reached the end of the road, the truck pulled into a large building that looked like a cross between a military base and a research facility. The walls were high, and there were no windows, just concrete and steel. It was completely isolated from the outside world, the kind of place you go when you don't want anyone to find out what's really going on. The convoy parked, and soldiers began to disembark, moving with purpose. I stayed close to my mum, not sure what to expect. Sheriff Baker was with us, but he didn't seem much more at ease than I felt. He looked at the facility, his face tight, his jaw clenched. "This isn't right," he muttered under his breath. "There's something here that's been hidden for a long time." I didn't understand what he meant, but I didn't have the time to ask. The soldier who had been driving our truck got out and motioned for us to follow him. "Stay close," he said. "We're taking you inside. We'll explain everything once you're secure." As we walked toward the entrance, I could hear the distant sound of machinery, the hum of some kind of generator or power source. It felt like the entire place was alive, buzzing with energy. The soldier led us through the building, past narrow hallways, through sterile white corridors that smelled faintly of antiseptic. There were no windows here, no natural light, just the harsh fluorescent glow of overhead lights. It felt wrong, like we were stepping into some place where the air was thick with secrets. We finally stopped at a large metal door. The soldier stepped forward and pressed a keycard against the scanner beside the door. There was a beep, followed by a loud click, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside was a small, stark room, with only a few chairs and a table. The walls were bare, save for a few monitors blinking dimly on the far wall. "This is where you'll wait," the soldier said, stepping aside. "We'll be back shortly with answers." And just like that, he left, leaving us alone in the sterile room. I could feel the tension building inside me. My mind was racing, trying to piece together everything that had happened, from Ed's strange behavior, to the things in the woods, to the soldiers who had been tracking us. There was so much I didn't understand, so much that didn't make sense. But as we sat down, the door slid open again. This time, it wasn't the soldier. It was a man in a suit, his face calm, his expression unreadable. He had the look of someone who had seen things that were far beyond the ordinary. "Hello," he said, his voice smooth but cold. "I'm Dr. Reynolds. I've been briefed on your situation. I'm here to explain what's going on, but I must ask that you remain calm. What you're about to hear may be difficult to understand." I didn't speak, neither did my mom. We just stared at him, waiting for him to continue. Dr. Reynolds smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "First, let me start by telling you that the events in Pine Hollow are far from random. What happened with Ed, with your town, it was all part of something larger, something we've been tracking for years." "Tracking?" Sheriff Baker's voice cut through the silence. "What do you mean, tracking? You knew about this?" Dr. Reynolds nodded, his expression still neutral. "We've known about the creatures in the woods for a long time. They're not just animals. They're not even human. They're part of an experiment. Project that began long before any of you were born." I couldn't speak. I couldn't process it. I looked at my mom, who was sitting beside me, her face pale. She seemed as lost as I was. Dr. Reynolds continued, his voice steady, almost rehearsed. "The creatures in Pine Hollow are part of a larger program, one that was designed to control and weaponize them. What you saw with Ed and his friends was only the beginning. These creatures are evolving, adapting, becoming something far more dangerous than we anticipated." I stood up suddenly, the weight of his words crushing me. "What do you mean, evolving?" I demanded, my voice rising. "What are they? Where did they come from?" Dr. Reynolds' smile faded slightly. "They came from a place far beyond anything you can understand. And the truth is, we can't stop them. Not anymore. The best we can do now is contain them." "Contain?" Sheriff Baker repeated, disbelief clear in his voice. "That's it. We're supposed to sit here and wait while these monsters take over everything." Dr. Reynolds didn't answer. Instead, he just looked at us with cold, calculating eyes. "We've been trying to stop them for decades," he said. "But the truth is, it's too late. They've spread too far, and now, Pine Hollow is just the beginning." Part 11. The hidden truth. Words that Dr. Reynolds spoke hung in the air, thick and suffocating. It was like the walls of the sterile room were closing in on us, pushing us into the truth that we had never asked for. My heart was racing, my mind struggling to process the implications of what we had just heard. It was too much to take in all at once. We've been trying to stop them for decades, Dr. Reynolds had said, and those words echoed in my mind like a haunting refrain. The creatures weren't just some accident. They weren't even natural. They were created, manipulated, and now they were evolving, growing stronger, becoming something we could never have prepared for. I turned to my mum, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw the same fear reflected in her eyes. I didn't know if it was because of what Dr. Reynolds had said, or because of the things we had already witnessed, but I saw the terror in her face. "We can't just sit here," I whispered to her, my voice tight. "We need to get out. We need to find a way to stop this." But how? How could we stop something that had been decades in the making? How could we fight back against creatures that weren't even human? Dr. Reynolds must have seen the look in our eyes, because he suddenly stepped forward, holding up his hands in a calming gesture. "I know this is a lot to process, but there's no time for panic. We need to move quickly." "Move quickly," I repeated, feeling the disbelief rise in my throat. "After everything that's happened, you want us to just what? Pretend like we can fix this?" "We don't have a choice," Dr. Reynolds said quietly, but his voice held the authority of someone who had dealt with far worse things than we could imagine. "The creatures you saw, the ones that have been hunting your town, those are just the first wave. We've contained the worst of them for now, but there are others, deeper in the swamps, and they're worse. They've learned from the ones that escaped." Sheriff Baker's voice cut through the growing tension. "You mean those things weren't meant to get out?" Dr. Reynolds didn't hesitate. "No, they were never meant to escape. The facility was supposed to be a containment, but it failed, and now the situation is spiraling out of control." His words landed like a punch to the gut. The containment had failed. The entire project had gone wrong, and now Pine Hollow was paying the price. I looked at the soldier who had been with us, the one who had driven us here. He was silent, his face stoic, but his eyes were full of something else. Guilt, shame, fear. "We should have moved faster," Dr. Reynolds continued, his gaze shifting toward the soldier. "But we underestimated the creatures, and we underestimated how quickly they could adapt. We thought we had more time. Now, there's no time left." I could feel the weight of his words pressing down on me. The town was already lost, and now we were stuck in a facility that was probably just as doomed. There was no escaping this nightmare. "So what now?" I asked, my voice cracking. "What can we do? If this place is supposed to stop them, and it's failing, then what hope do we have?" Dr. Reynolds didn't flinch. He was used to dealing with hopelessness. I could tell. "You can help us find a way to stop them. That's your choice. But understand this, we can't do it without you." "Help?" Sheriff Baker scoffed, looking at him like he was insane. "You're asking us to help you after everything you've done, after everything they've done. You think we'll just sign up for this?" But Dr. Reynolds wasn't intimidated. His eyes remained cold, calculating. "You don't have a choice, Sheriff. We're the only ones who know how to contain them. We've been tracking them, studying them, for decades. The sooner you understand that, the better." There was a pause, and then I felt a chill. I turned toward my mum, who was standing next to me, her eyes wide with disbelief. Her hand clutched mine tightly. "Alex, what do we do?" she whispered, the fear obvious in her voice. "We can't just stay here. We can't just wait." I didn't know how to answer. How could I? We were in a situation that didn't have a clear answer. It was like we were living in some twisted nightmare, and the more we tried to wake up, the deeper we fell. "We can't stay," I finally said, my voice shaking. "But we can't leave either, not without answers." Dr. Reynolds gave a slight nod, his expression unwavering. "Then you'll help us. You have no choice. We need to find a way to track the creatures that are still out there, and you're going to help us do that." "But we don't know anything about these things," I protested. "We've seen them, but we don't know how to fight them, or even what they are. You expect us to just follow you and hope for the best?" "Not hope for the best," Dr. Reynolds replied. "We'll track them, capture them, study them. It's the only way to stop this from spreading further. We've learned from our mistakes, and we can teach you, but you have to trust us." I wanted to say no. I wanted to refuse him, to walk away and pretend this was all a nightmare. But I couldn't. I couldn't ignore the truth. The creatures weren't just hunting us. They were everywhere, and they weren't stopping. And maybe, just maybe, this was the only chance we had left. Part 12. Into the depths. Weight of Dr. Reynolds' words pressed down on us like a suffocating fog. His calm demeanor made it all the worse. We were standing on the edge of something far darker than I could have ever imagined. My mind raced, but every thought felt like it was getting lost in the chaos, in the uncertainty. He was asking us to trust him, to follow him into the very heart of this nightmare. My mom looked at me, her eyes full of fear and confusion. "Alex, do you think we can trust him? Do you think this is the right thing to do?" I didn't know. How could I know? Everything we'd seen, everything we'd witnessed in Pine Hollow had shattered any illusion of safety or normalcy. Trust felt like a distant memory, something that belonged to another time, another life. But standing there, listening to the hum of the facility, the weight of the past few days pressing on my chest, I knew we had no other choice. "We don't have a choice, Mom," I whispered. "This is the only chance we have." Dr. Reynolds nodded at my words, but there was something almost too pleased about his response. He didn't seem to care that we were unsure. He didn't seem to care that we were terrified. The only thing that mattered was the mission. "The creatures you've seen, the ones in the woods," Dr. Reynolds said, his voice now carrying a weight I couldn't ignore. "They're part of something far more dangerous. They're evolving. What started as a small-scale operation has spread beyond our control, beyond any of our control. And now, we need to stop them before they become an unstoppable force." The truth hit me like a slap in the face. This was no accident. The creatures were manufactured, created by people who believed they could control them. But what Dr. Reynolds was telling us now was that the creatures had surpassed whatever boundaries had been placed on them. The experiment had failed, and Pine Hollow was just the beginning of something far worse. I wanted to ask more, but the words caught in my throat. There was something else in Dr. Reynolds' eyes, something I couldn't quite place. It was as if he was holding back, as if there was something else he wasn't telling us. But I didn't have the time or energy to question it further. We were already too deep in this nightmare. "Where do we go now?" Sheriff Baker's voice broke through the silence. He'd been listening to Dr. Reynolds, but I could tell he was still processing everything. "What's the next step?" Dr. Reynolds gestured for us to follow him. "We need to get to the research room. We'll gather what we need to track the creatures and begin a full assessment. There are still a few containment units that have been holding the more volatile specimens. We need to find out how much they've adapted." We followed him through the facility, our footsteps echoing in the cold, sterile halls. The air smelled of chemicals, antiseptic, and something faintly metallic. It felt like we were walking through a graveyard, each corner hiding secrets that I didn't want to know. The deeper we went into the building, the colder it became. The lights above flickered, casting shadows that seemed to dance on the walls, making the place feel like it was alive, breathing, waiting. It was a feeling I couldn't shake. Every step I took felt like I was walking further away from anything familiar, anything safe. We arrived at a large metal door, more secure than any we'd passed before. The soldiers standing outside were armed and alert, their faces grim. They didn't speak to us as we passed, but I could feel their eyes on us, sizing us up. They weren't here for our protection. They were here to make sure that operations stayed under control. Dr. Reynolds swiped a keycard, and the door slid open with a mechanical hiss. Inside, the room was dimly lit, filled with rows of monitors and equipment. The walls were lined with tanks, each one filled with a thick, greenish liquid. Some of the tanks were moving, the shapes inside twitching and shifting like something alive. I recoiled instinctively. My stomach churned at the sight. This wasn't science, this was horror. "Welcome to the heart of the operation," Dr. Reynolds said, his tone flat. "These creatures are the result of years of experimentation. We thought we could control them. We were wrong." I stepped closer to one of the tanks, trying to ignore the nausea rising in my chest. Inside the tank was a figure, its limbs long and twisted, its body almost human but not quite. It was like looking at something caught between two worlds. Its face was blank, expressionless, but its eyes were wide open, dark and unblinking. "Is it alive?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Reynolds didn't answer at first. He just watched me, his eyes cold, calculating. "Yes, they're alive, but not like you think. They don't need food, they don't need air, they're different." I stepped back from the tank, feeling a wave of disgust wash over me. I didn't know if I was sickened by the creatures themselves or by what they represented. Either way, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were in way over our heads. We need to understand how they're evolving. Dr. Reynolds continued. These are the first generation, but there are others out there, stronger, faster. We need to know how to stop them. His words felt like a punch to the gut. There was no stopping them, not now. The creatures were out there, multiplying, evolving, and we were stuck in the middle of it all, in a facility that was just as much a prison as the town we had just escaped. There's no way out, I muttered under my breath. Mom's hand found mine again, her grip tight. She didn't say anything, but I could feel the fear in her too. We were trapped, and we had no idea how to fight back. Dr. Reynolds turned to the monitors, tapping a few keys. The screens flickered to life, displaying maps of the town, of the woods, of the facility. His eyes scanned the data quickly, as if looking for something specific. "There's something I need to show you," he said, his voice suddenly low. "Urgent." He pulled up a new screen, and my heart sank. On the map of the town, there was a red dot, a cluster of them, actually right in the center of Pine Hollow. It was moving, and it was growing. "Those are the creatures," Dr. Reynolds explained. "They're spreading. They've already reached the outskirts of town, and they're getting stronger." I turned to Sheriff Baker. His face was pale, his eyes wide. "How do we stop them?" he asked, his voice shaking for the first time since I'd met him. Dr. Reynolds' answer came slowly, his gaze never leaving the screen. "You don't," he said quietly. "You can't stop them. Not anymore." Part 13. No way back. Reynolds' words hung in the air, suffocating us. "You can't stop them. Not anymore." The weight of the truth crushed down on me. My stomach churned. The realization was slowly sinking in. Whatever was happening, whatever we'd seen in Pine Hollow, it was part of something far bigger, far more dangerous than we could have ever understood. And now, it wasn't just a town under siege. It was the beginning of something that could spread, could wipe out far more than we could imagine. Sheriff Baker finally spoke, his voice barely audible. "How did this happen? How did we end up here?" Dr. Reynolds didn't look up from the monitors. "You didn't know," he said flatly, his eyes scanning the data on the screen. "We thought we had control. The creatures were meant to be a controlled experiment. We were studying their evolution, trying to understand how we could weaponize them. It was supposed to help us control future biological warfare, but it backfired. The creatures adapted too quickly. They evolved faster than we could handle." I stared at him, my mind reeling. Weaponized them. They were using these creatures, these monsters, as experiments, like lab rats, to be manipulated for something as vile as warfare. The very thought made me sick. "But why Pine Hollow?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Why here?" "That's the problem," Dr. Reynolds said, his voice losing some of its usual cold composure. "We didn't pick this location randomly. Pine Hollow was chosen because of its isolation, but we underestimated the creature's ability to adapt to their environment. The woods around here are ... infected. The land has an energy, a presence. It's been influencing the creatures in ways we didn't anticipate. And now that they've spread, they're growing stronger, faster. Energy." Sheriff Baker repeated, his voice thick with disbelief. "What are you talking about? Are you telling me the woods are ... alive?" Dr. Reynolds looked at him, his face unreadable. "In a way, yes. Not in the way you're thinking, but there is something in the land here. Something older, deeper. The creatures are becoming one with it. They've bonded with the land, and now, they're spreading." I looked over at Mum, who was still standing beside me, her face pale as the horrors around us unfolded. She had been silent for most of the conversation, but now she whispered, her voice shaking. "So, what happens now? Do we just ... wait?" Dr. Reynolds didn't answer immediately. He was absorbed in the monitors, tapping at the keyboard with rapid precision. It was clear he was searching for something critical. I had no idea what was going on, but the longer I stood there, the more desperate I became for answers. "Dr. Reynolds," I said, my voice cracking with a mixture of fear and anger, "how do we stop this? If this facility has been tracking these creatures for decades, why hasn't anyone done anything? Why are we still sitting here while Pine Hollow is burning?" His eyes flicked to me, and for a moment, I saw something that looked almost like regret, but it was fleeting, gone in an instant. "We've tried," he said quietly. "We tried containing them, tracking them, studying them, but every time we thought we had a solution, they adapted. They evolved in ways we didn't understand. The worst part is, we don't know how far they've spread. We don't even know how to kill them." I felt a chill creep up my spine. Kill them. It hadn't even occurred to me that they needed to be killed. I had thought about surviving, about escaping, but these things weren't just hunting us. They were growing, spreading, and we were helpless against them. I stepped forward, my frustration boiling over. There has to be something you can do. You've been tracking them for years. You must have a plan, a weapon, something. Dr. Reynolds turned to face me fully for the first time. His eyes were cold, calculating, but there was something. His expression knows something that made me feel like a small part of him was finally letting down the wall. There's nothing that can stop them, Alex. Nothing that we can do. Not now. It's too late. His words echoed in my mind, louder than any scream. Too late. What did that even mean? We'd spent the past days running, hiding, surviving, hoping for something to come and fix it all. But now I understood. There was no fixing it. Not now. Not with what we were dealing with. But then something happened. The sound at first. It was faint, like the distant hum of machinery, or maybe the wind. But it wasn't the wind. It was a low, thumping noise, deep, rhythmic, like something large and heavy moving through the earth. Beneath us, I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. It's them. They're here. Shut it down. Dr. Reynolds barked to one of the soldiers who had been standing in the corner. We need to move. Now. The soldier rushed to the control panel near the wall. But just as his hand hovered over the switches, the entire building trembled. The thumping noise grew louder. Then, it was followed by a horrifying screech, something that sounded both human and animal, twisted in agony. It echoed through the walls, vibrating in my bones. Get to the containment units, Dr. Reynolds ordered, his voice sharp and commanding. We don't have much time. I felt the ground shake beneath my feet again. The sound of claws scratching against metal was deafening. They were here, and they were closer than we had thought. The soldiers quickly moved, their weapons raised, but they were just as rattled as I was. No one had expected the creatures to be this close, this fast. Mom grabbed my arm, her grip tight, her eyes wide with fear. Alex, what do we do? We survive, I said, my voice hoarse. I didn't have a better answer. Not anymore. Dr. Reynolds led the way, moving swiftly through the halls as the sounds of destruction grew closer. The lights flickered above us, casting ominous shadows on the walls. It felt like the entire facility was coming alive, reacting to the creatures that were swarming through it. The soldiers were prepared for battle, but what good would it do against something like this? How could we fight these things? How could anyone fight something that was evolving, adapting, becoming something impossible to defeat? We reached the containment room, and Dr. Reynolds rushed inside, gesturing for us to follow. Inside, there were more tanks, more monitors, more of the creatures, some alive, some dead, some suspended in various stages of transformation. I had no idea what half of this was. I only knew that we were running out of time. Get in, Dr. Reynolds barked, motioning toward a reinforced steel door at the far end of the room. Now, I didn't need to be told twice. We ran to the door, but as we neared it, the walls trembled again, and the ground shook beneath us. The door had already started to close, but not fast enough, and then we heard it, a sickening screech, louder than any of the others. The creature's roar echoed through the halls, and the door slammed shut just as the creature collided with it. The steel door groaned under the impact, bending slightly inwards. The creature's claws were on the other side, raking against the metal, its roar deafening. We're not safe, I whispered to myself, my heart pounding in my chest. We're not safe anywhere. And then, I heard the voice in my head, voice that had been whispering to me ever since we entered this nightmare. It's only just begun. Part 14. The unraveling sound of claws scraping against metal filled the room, reverberating through the steel walls. The creature outside was relentless. Each screech, each desperate slam of its body against the door, felt like the world itself was being torn apart. My heart hammered in my chest, and every fiber of my being screamed for me to run, to find a way out of this hell. But there was nowhere to go. Dr. Reynolds stood near the control panel, his fingers flying over the buttons, as if he were trying to contain a beast far worse than the one that was already outside. He didn't seem afraid. No, his face was set, focused, like he was calculating his next move, trying to stay in control. But I could feel it, like everyone else in the room. We were losing control. I glanced over at Mom, who was clinging to the side of the room, her face pale and drawn. She didn't speak. We hadn't said much since we entered the facility, but I could feel the terror in the air thickening. She was still holding it together, barely, but I knew she didn't believe we were going to make it out alive. "Dr. Reynolds," Sheriff Baker barked, his voice cutting through the rising tension. "What's happening? What the hell is going on?" The sound of the creature outside intensified, a monstrous thud rattling the door. The metal groaned, bending beneath the pressure. I could feel the temperature in the room drop, and it had nothing to do with the cold steel walls or the faint hum of the air conditioning. This was something else. It felt like the room itself was suffocating under the weight of the impending destruction. Dr. Reynolds didn't look up from the controls. "We've reached a point of no return. The containment protocols were never designed to handle this. This escalation. What you saw in Pine Hollow, what's happening now, it's all part of the same pattern. The creatures have evolved, adapted to the environment, and now they're linked to something older, something in the land itself. Linked to something," Sheriff Baker repeated, his voice growing more frantic. "What the hell are you talking about?" The door groaned again, and a loud crack echoed through the facility. The creature was closer than ever before. Dr. Reynolds exhaled slowly, his hands still moving over the control panel. The creatures were never meant to be controlled. They were supposed to be he'd understood, but we're dealing with something far beyond our understanding now. It's not just the creatures, it's the land, the woods themselves. Pine Hollow was chosen as a testing ground, but something in the area, something ancient, is empowering them. They're no longer just experiments. They are part of something bigger, something primal. I stood still, processing his words, but my mind couldn't quite wrap around the enormity of what he was saying. "The woods, the land, I repeated, my voice a mix of confusion and disbelief. "You're telling me the woods are causing this?" Dr. Reynolds finally looked up at me, his face grave. "Not just the woods, Alex, the land itself. There's a presence here, something buried deep beneath the earth, a force that we couldn't contain. We tried to separate the creatures from it, but they've become part of it, and now that presence has infected everything." My breath caught in my throat. I didn't know what he was talking about, but the way he said it, like the earth itself was alive, and we had unwittingly disturbed something that had been slumbering for centuries, maybe longer. The scratching outside the door intensified, but it wasn't the creature, it was something else, something that wasn't trying to break through, it was trying to escape. The soldiers in the room shifted uneasily, their eyes darting around, weapons still at the ready, but I saw the fear in their eyes now. They weren't just afraid of the creature, they were afraid of what Dr. Reynolds had just hinted at. The land, the presence that seemed to be part of this entire nightmare, was spreading. It wasn't just coming for Pine Hollow, it was coming for all of us, and that thought sent a chill down my spine. "Is there anything we can do?" I asked quietly. The words felt hollow, desperate. I wasn't sure what I was even asking anymore. Dr. Reynolds didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned back to the control panel, his fingers hovering over a set of red buttons. The room was tense, and for a moment, I thought he might not respond at all. Then he spoke, his voice low and heavier. "There's one option, but I don't think you'll like it. We can stop them, contain them, but it will take everything we have. The facility can be sealed, but only if we activate the containment system. But the price is high. The system is designed to trap everything within it, including anyone who stays behind." The air went still, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. "What do you mean? Trap everything?" I whispered. We can't just lock ourselves in here, can we?" Dr. Reynolds nodded slowly. "We can, but it means sealing off the entire facility. It will hold them here, but it will also lock us in. There is no way out once the system is activated. The creatures will be contained, but so will we." The realization hit like a freight train. There was no escape. Whatever it was that had been unleashed, whatever horrors we'd seen in Pine Hollow, it wasn't just the creatures. It was the entire land, the entire town. All of it had become a prison. And now, we were being offered a chance to lock ourselves in with the very thing we were trying to escape from. "How long would it take?" Sheriff Baker asked, his voice ragged. He was trying to sound composed, but I could hear the desperation beneath it. "How long until the system activates?" "Minutes," Dr. Reynolds replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "Maybe less. It's all automated, but it requires one final input to begin the lockdown. If we don't act quickly, We won't make it. I looked at Mom, who stood beside me, her face pale and drawn. I could see the fear in her eyes, the realization that we were being given one last, terrible choice. We'll never make it out of here alive, will we? She whispered, almost to herself. I didn't know how to answer her. The truth was too painful. We were running out of time, running out of options. We're running out of time, I said softly, more to myself than anyone else, and I don't know what's going to happen. Dr. Reynolds looked at us, his face grim. You don't have a choice. You need to decide. Activate the system, or let them break free. And if they break free, he didn't finish his sentence. He didn't need to. I could hear the growling, the howling. The creatures were close, closer than I had ever thought. The facility was starting to tremble again. Whatever was out there was almost upon us. Part 15. The price of survival. Sound of the creatures' howls echoed through the walls, their growls growing louder by the second. It was as if the very air around us was trembling with their presence. My heart was racing, every breath coming in short, ragged gasps. We were running out of time, and the weight of the choice that lay before us felt almost unbearable. Activate it, Sheriff Baker said suddenly, his voice raw with determination. Do it, Dr. Reynolds, whatever it takes. We can't let them get out of here. Dr. Reynolds hesitated for a moment, his eyes flicking to the control panel. His fingers hovered over the red buttons, a faint trace of uncertainty passing across his face. For the first time, I saw something like doubt in his eyes, but it was gone just as quickly as it came. He turned to face us, his expression cold but resolute. Once I activate the system, there's no turning back. We'll be sealed in with them, locked in here forever. We'll be trapped in this facility, just like the creatures. We won't survive if we don't act now. I looked at my mum, her hand still clutched tightly in mine. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. She hadn't said much since we entered the facility, but now she opened her mouth, her voice trembling. Alex, what if this is worse? What if activating this system only makes things worse? I don't know, I whispered back. But if we don't do something, those things will get out. Pine Hollow won't be the only town. It'll spread. We'll all be gone. Mom closed her eyes, her lips trembling as she nodded. I just... I don't know anymore. There was a long silence. The howling and growling from outside was deafening now, the creatures pressing closer. There was no more time for hesitation. We were running out of options. Dr. Reynolds looked at us one last time, and then, without another word, he slammed his palm onto the control panel. The buttons lit up, and a deep mechanical hum filled the air. The lights above flickered and dimmed. The entire facility seemed to shake, like something ancient and powerful had just been awakened. I felt it in my bones. The building was alive, responding to the command. The sound of metal doors sliding into place echoed through the corridors. We were being sealed in, the doors locked with a final, deafening click. I stood frozen, my chest tight, my mind racing. This was it. The lockdown was complete. We had just sealed ourselves in with the very creatures we had been running from. And then the alarms went off. A blaring, mechanical shriek echoed through the facility, louder than any sound I had ever heard. It wasn't just an alert, it was a warning that the containment system had been activated, a warning that we were now prisoners, just like the monsters outside. The walls seemed to close in on us. The air was thick with the sound of the creatures, their howls now distorted by the seal. They were trying to break through. I could feel their presence, like a shadow creeping over us, filling every inch of the room. Is it done? Sheriff Baker's voice was barely audible, his eyes darting around the room, his hand still gripping his gun. Are we safe? Dr. Reynolds didn't answer right away. He just kept watching the monitors, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he checked the system. It's done, he said finally. For now, the creatures are sealed in, but we're not safe. Not yet. The sound of scraping claws came from behind the walls, and I saw Dr. Reynolds' face tighten. This is just the beginning. We've activated the system, but it's not a permanent solution. They'll adapt. The system won't hold them forever. We need to get to the extraction point before they breach the containment again. Extraction, I repeated, my voice shaking. You mean we're still leaving, even after what we just did? We have to, Dr. Reynolds said, his voice tinged with urgency. We need to get out of here, find the research data, and figure out how we can stop the spread. If we don't, this place will be overrun. and so will the rest of the world. I couldn't think straight anymore. All I could focus on was the growling, the sound of claws raking against metal, the feeling that we were running out of time. "Where's the extraction point?" Sheriff Baker asked, his voice hard. He wasn't wasting time anymore. He was all business. Dr. Reynolds pointed to a map on one of the monitors. "There's an emergency exit through the east wing. It leads to a secure helicopter landing pad. We've set up an extraction point there, but we'll need to move fast. We couldn't stay here any longer." I didn't know what else to say. We had done what we could, activated the system, sealed the creatures in, but even now, I knew it wasn't enough. The creatures were smarter, faster, and stronger than we'd ever realized. I looked at my mum again, and she met my gaze. She didn't say anything, but I saw the same thing in her eyes that I felt in mine. The fear, the hopelessness, that, and then there was a sound I hadn't expected to hear, the sound of footsteps, heavy and fast, approaching from the hallway. "There, here," Dr. Reynolds muttered, his face pale. The creatures were already trying to breach the containment. Part 16. The escapeth sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, reached our ears. It wasn't just the creatures outside anymore. They were inside. The pounding on the steel doors had turned into a rhythmic, relentless drumbeat, a warning that we were running out of time. "They're already inside," Dr. Reynolds said, his voice tight with urgency. "This isn't good. We need to move now." I glanced around the room, my eyes falling on the emergency exit map on the wall. The helicopter landing pad was on the other side of the east wing, but getting there wasn't going to be easy. The creatures were too close, and the lockdown had triggered every defense system, which meant the hallways were already filled with more creatures than we could fight off. "We don't have much of a choice," Sheriff Baker said, his hand gripping his gun, ready to move. "We make it to the exit, or we die here." Dr. Reynolds nodded grimly. "I'll guide you to the exit, but once we get to the east wing, it's every man for himself." Mom's grip tightened around my hand as we moved into the narrow corridor, the air thick with tension. I could feel the walls vibrating slightly, the distant growls and screeches echoing through the facility. They were closing in. We could hear them in the walls, scraping and shifting, their hunger palpable. Dr. Reynolds moved first, his quick steps echoing in the hallway. "Stay close," he muttered, "and for God's sake, keep quiet. The last thing we need is to alert them to our position." I followed closely behind, Sheriff Baker and Mum close by. The entire building seemed to be alive with the creatures' movements, every sound amplified in the oppressive silence. My mind raced, and my thoughts couldn't stop from returning to what Dr. Reynolds had said earlier, that the creatures were evolving, adapting. What if we were already too late? But there was no time to dwell on that. We had one option left: escape. If we didn't make it to the extraction point, the creatures would be free to roam, and this nightmare would spread beyond Pine Hollow. The thought made my skin crawl, but I pushed it down. We couldn't afford to think like that. We reached the east wing entrance, and Dr. Reynolds quickly checked the door. He paused, his face tight with concentration, then nodded. "Now or never," he said. The door opened with a soft hiss, and we slipped through into the dimly lit corridor. The emergency lighting cast long shadows along the walls. We moved quickly, but silently, each of us on edge, waiting for the inevitable crash of the creature's claws against the steel walls. That, as we made our way deeper into the facility, the sounds from the walls intensified. It was like the creatures were all around us, waiting, watching. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, my breath shallow and quick. "We're almost there," Dr. Reynolds said, his voice strained but steady. "Just a little farther." Suddenly, a scream tore through the air. It was raw, animalistic. Someone was in trouble. My stomach dropped as I spun toward the sound. "Move! Move!" Sheriff Baker shouted, his voice low and urgent. "They've found us." I didn't need to be told twice. We ran faster now, every step echoing in the hall. The creatures' growls grew louder, the thumping of their claws against metal resonating through the halls. I could feel the weight of the terror pressing in on us, suffocating. "We're not going to make it," Mum cried, her voice shaking as she stumbled behind me. She was still gripping my hand, but the panic in her voice made my stomach twist. "We have to," I shouted, pulling her forward. But I didn't believe it. I wasn't sure we were going to make it. It felt like the world was closing in on us, just as we reached the final hallway that led to the extraction point. The door ahead of us burst open with a deafening bang. The first creature emerged, its body twisted and inhuman, its black eyes gleaming with hunger. It howled, a shrill, guttural sound that sent a jolt of panic through me. "Get to the door," Dr. Reynolds yelled, pushing us forward. Now, the creature lunged at us, its claws raking through the air. But before I could even think, Sheriff Baker fired. The shotgun blast rang out, but the creature didn't fall. It staggered back, its skin seething and twitching like it was absorbing the blow. Another creature appeared behind it, then another. They were closing in. "Mom," I shouted, pulling her toward the door. We had seconds, maybe less. We reached the helicopter pad, just as another wave of creatures emerged from the hallway. The helicopter was waiting for us, its rotors spinning wildly, the sound of the engine deafening. The soldiers were already loading up the last of the survivors into the chopper. We didn't hesitate, we ran straight for it, but the creatures were right behind us. The first soldier shoved us onto the helicopter, and as we climbed inside, I could see the creatures swarming toward us, their claws outstretched, their howls deafening. But it was too late. The door to the helicopter slammed shut, and the pilot gunned the engine. The helicopter lifted off the ground just as the creatures reached the door. Their claws scraped against the metal, their mouths opening wide as they tried to break through. But they were too late. The chopper shot into the sky, leaving the chaos of the facility and Pine Hollow far behind us. As we ascended, the view of the facility below us grew smaller. The once pristine land, the town, the forest, all of it, was now consumed by the creatures. It was like the entire world was being swallowed up by something we couldn't even begin to comprehend. "We made it," Sheriff Baker said, his voice heavy with relief. But his eyes didn't match his words. He didn't seem convinced. No, none of us were convinced. Dr. Reynolds sat silently beside us, his face pale. "It's not over," he muttered, his voice barely audible above the sound of the helicopter. "We've escaped for now, but the creatures ... they're already spreading. They'll keep adapting, keep evolving, and the worst part is theirs. More of them out there, worse than the ones you saw in Pine Hollow." I felt the chill in his words, like ice creeping down my spine. It wasn't over, it couldn't be. The helicopter soared higher, taking us farther from the hell we had left behind. But even as we flew towards safety, I couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was waiting for us. The creatures were just the beginning, and I wasn't sure we were ever going to escape the darkness. Part 17. The deeper darkness. Helicopter soared higher, the distant roar of the rotors a hollow echo in my ears. My body felt numb, as if I had left my humanity behind, suspended in the chaos of everything that had just happened. We were moving, away from Pine Hollow, away from the creatures, but the terror wasn't over. It had only just begun. I leaned back in my seat, my hands still clenched tightly around my mum's. She was silent beside me, her face pale, her eyes staring blankly ahead. Her grip was strong, but I could feel the tremble in her fingers. She wasn't just afraid, she was broken. We all were. Dr. Reynolds sat across from us, his face expressionless, his hands folded in his lap. I couldn't read him. The cold, detached way he operated, like he was used to seeing things like this, was more unsettling than the monsters we had just escaped. His calm was unnerving. It made me wonder how much he truly knew about what was happening. The soldier, in charge of the chopper, kept his eyes on the horizon, his face rigid, unmoving. His gaze flicked occasionally toward the monitors attached to the chopper, but his focus was on the mission. I couldn't blame him for that. I had no idea who he was or what his role was in this mess. But one thing was clear, he had seen enough horrors to remain unfazed. Still, even he looked tense, constantly glancing at the rear view, like he was expecting something to follow us. I swallowed hard, trying to fight the nausea that threatened to rise in my stomach. "Dr. Reynolds," I said, my voice hoarse. "What happens now? Are we safe? Where are we going?" Dr. Reynolds didn't answer right away. He looked at me for a long moment, his gaze cold but calculating. Then, his lips parted in a slight, almost imperceptible sigh. "No, you're not safe," he said flatly, his voice devoid of emotion. "None of us are. We've only bought ourselves a little more time, that's all." His words cut through me like a sharp blade. I didn't want to hear them. I didn't want to believe them, but deep down, I knew he was right. Pine Hollow was just the beginning. The creatures we had seen, the ones that had taken over the town, they were part of something far bigger, something we couldn't fight. So, what's next? I asked, trying to keep the tremor from my voice. We go to a secure facility, Dr. Reynolds replied, his eyes flicking to the monitors again. It's an isolated site, one of the few remaining places where we can control the situation. We'll regroup, assess the damage, and begin the process of tracking the creatures that escaped Pine Hollow. Tracking, Sheriff Baker spoke up, his voice thick with disbelief. You think you can track them? After all of this? Dr. Reynolds turned his gaze toward Sheriff Baker, his eyes sharp. It's not about tracking them, Sheriff. It's about finding out how much damage has been done and preventing it from spreading further. You saw how they adapted to the land. In Pine Hollow, it's possible they've started to spread beyond the town already. We've been tracking them for decades. Sheriff, Dr. Reynolds continued, his voice growing quieter, more calculated. But we weren't prepared for this. We've never seen this level of evolution before. They're getting smarter, faster. The real question is not whether we can stop the myths, whether we can survive long enough to even try. I looked over at my mum. She didn't say anything. She just stared ahead, her eyes wide, her mind seemingly somewhere far away. She had been through enough. I didn't know how she was still standing, let alone keeping herself composed. The fact that she was still holding it together was a testament to her strength, but I could see how much it was costing her. I wanted to comfort her, but I didn't know how. The truth was, I wasn't sure if any of us were going to make it out of this alive. The soldier piloting the helicopter didn't say a word. He just kept his focus on the road ahead, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every so often. I caught a glimpse of something in his expressions, something I didn't want to see. It wasn't just fear, it was dread. The helicopter started to descend, and I could see the secure facility below, nestled in the center of a sprawling, heavily wooded area. It was surrounded by a high concrete wall, with watchtowers on each corner. The facility was massive, industrial, and looked like a military base, but it was strangely silent. There was no activity outside. The surrounding land was eerily still, the trees swaying in a breeze that felt far too calm. Are we sure this is safe? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Dr. Reynolds gave me a glance, a flicker of something I couldn't place crossing his face. We're as safe as we can be right now, he said, but don't get too comfortable. The creatures will follow. They always do. We touched down at the facility, and the doors slid open with a soft hiss. The cold air outside hit me instantly, sharp and biting, and for a moment, I forgot how hot and claustrophobic the helicopter had been. But the chill didn't make me feel any better. Soldiers lined the entrance to the facility, guns raised, their faces hidden behind black masks. They didn't say a word as we disembarked, their eyes scanning us with cold precision. These were men who had seen far worse than we had, and they weren't interested in our questions. They just wanted us inside. Dr. Reynolds led the way, his pace quick and purposeful. As we entered the facility, I noticed the thick steel walls and the high-tech security systems, but there was something off about the place. It felt ... too sterile, too controlled. We'll be safe here, Dr. Reynolds said, as he led us down a narrow hallway. For now, this is our base of operations. But understand, this is just the beginning. The creatures have spread, and they won't stop. I turned to look at him, but there was no reassurance in his eyes. Only cold facts. Where do we go from here? Sheriff Baker asked. Dr. Reynolds stopped in front of a reinforced steel door and turned to face us. First, we assess the damage. Then we figure out what to do next. If we can contain the creatures in Pine Hollow, we'll have a chance. But if they've already spread beyond the town, we're running out of options. He turned back toward the door, swiping a key card. The door clicked open, and he motioned for us to follow. Inside. The facility was sterile, clinical, with rows of monitors and high-tech equipment. But what caught my attention wasn't the machines or the technology, was the room, the large containment units lining the walls. Each one held a creature. Some were alive, some not. But what I saw in those tanks made my blood run cold. These were the same creatures we'd seen in Pine Hollow, but in these tanks, they looked ... different, more evolved. We've been tracking their evolution, Dr. Reynolds said, his voice echoing in the sterile room. This is where it began, and this is where it ends. I swallowed hard. This wasn't over. We were just beginning to realize how deep the nightmare really went, and that thought filled me with dread, because I knew that whatever happened next, we would never go back to the world we once knew. Part 18. Into the abyss. Sterile walls of the facility felt suffocating as we followed Dr. Reynolds deeper into its heart. The buzz of fluorescent lights above us only added to the tension, echoing through the cold corridors. We had been here for what felt like hours, moving through a maze of high-tech labs and dimly lit hallways, but every corner we turned seemed to raise more questions than answers. I could feel my mom's hand tightening around mine again as we walked. She hadn't said much since we arrived, but I knew her mind was racing just like mine. We were safe, for now relatively safe, but I couldn't shake the sense that we were only a step away from something far worse. Dr. Reynolds stopped at another reinforced door. The cold steel gleamed under the dim lights, and he turned to face us. His expression, unreadable. "We're almost there," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "This room contains the last of the data we need. The rest of you can stay here. I'll handle the final tests." "Tests?" Sheriff Baker asked, his brow furrowed with suspicion. "What kind of tests?" Dr. Reynolds didn't answer. He simply nodded at the door, and with a swipe of his card, it slid open. Inside was a large, dimly lit room. I couldn't make out much of the space, but I could see several monitors flickering with images of the creatures, the same ones we had seen in Pine Hollow, only these were locked in high-tech containment tanks. But there was something different about them. They were bigger now, more dangerous. The air in the room was thick with the hum of machines. My eyes scanned the monitors, but the footage was unsettling. The creatures were moving in ways I had never seen before, their bodies shifting and twitching as if they were preparing to break free from the tanks. But what terrified me most wasn't their appearance, it was the way they reacted when the light from the monitors hit them. They seemed to ... recognize it. "Do you see?" Dr. Reynolds spoke, his voice almost a whisper as he glanced over at us. "They're evolving faster. These creatures ... they've adapted to the technology. They understand it. They're learning. Learning," I repeated. "You're telling me they're learning from us?" Dr. Reynolds didn't answer. Immediately, his eyes were fixed on the monitor, his face set in a mixture of awe and dread. "They're not just learning, they're evolving beyond what we expected. The land in Pine Hollow is part of the equation. These creatures are growing in ways we can't even measure." Suddenly, one of the creatures in the tank let out a guttural roar, shaking the entire room. Its body thrashed against the glass, slamming into it with enough force that I was sure the tank would crack. Mom gasped, her body tensing as the creature's dark eyes locked onto us. I could feel its gaze, cold and piercing, like it was studying us, sizing us up as if it already knew we were its prey. "What? What are they doing?" Mom whispered. "They're communicating," Dr. Reynolds said, his voice filled with a chilling calm. "The creatures are starting to communicate with each other. They understand each other, and they're adapting to everything around them." I felt a cold sweat on the back of my neck as the creature in the tank thrashed again, its claws scraping against the glass. The sound was so loud it was almost unbearable, and for a moment, I thought I saw the glass crack. I looked at the others, my heart racing. "We need to go," I said, my voice shaking. "Now." Dr. Reynolds turned to us, his face suddenly hard. "We're not leaving yet. Not until I finish this." "Finish what?" Sheriff Baker asked, his voice low but full of anger. "This is insane, Reynolds. Those things will break free any second. You've got no idea what you're dealing with." Dr. Reynolds didn't reply. Instead, he pressed a few buttons on the nearby control panel, and the tank holding one of the creatures began to glow. A soft, eerie hum filled the room as the creature's thrashing slowed, as if the system was controlling it. But there was something unnatural about it. The creature's eyes went dark, its body going limp, and yet, it was still alive. "This is what we've been working on," Dr. Reynolds said, his voice almost reverent. "We can control them, we can contain them, but it requires more than just technology. It requires understanding, the connection to the land, to the presence in Pine Hollow. It's what makes them different, and it's what makes them so dangerous." "Connection," I repeated, my mind still spinning. "What are you talking about? You said you were studying them, but now you're telling us you've been controlling them." "Yes," Dr. Reynolds answered, turning to face us fully now, his face grim. "We've been studying them for years, trying to find a way to control them. But the moment we thought we had the upper hand, they adapted. They've bonded with the land itself, and that bond is making them smarter and stronger. Sheriff Baker stepped forward, his voice trembling with anger. How do you control something like that? How do you stop them? Dr. Reynolds looked at him, his expression serious. You don't, not completely. You can only delay the inevitable. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Delay the inevitable, I echoed. You're telling me that we're just supposed to keep running? That there's no way to stop them? There is a way, Dr. Reynolds said, his voice softer now, but it's a long shot. We need to find the heart of the infection, the core of the creature's evolution. If we can destroy the source of the land itself, we can stop them from spreading. We can stop them from ever adapting again. The room fell silent as his words sunk in. The creatures outside, the ones we had seen, they were just the beginning. The source was still out there, and it was part of something much bigger. And we were running out of time to stop it. We need to get to the heart of it. Dr. Reynolds continued, looking at all of us. The sooner we can isolate the source, the sooner we can stop it. But understand this, it won't be easy, and it won't be clean. I swallowed hard. There was a feeling growing in my chest, a sense of dread, of inevitability. The world we had known was gone, replaced by something monstrous. And the only way to survive was to go deeper into the abyss, to confront whatever was at the core of this nightmare. We don't have a choice, Sheriff Baker muttered under his breath. Let's do it. Part 19. The heart of the nightmare-wreathed silence in the room was suffocating as Dr. Reynolds' words sank in. We were standing on the precipice of something far worse than I could have imagined. The creatures, the terror, the madness, it wasn't just about them anymore. It was about something much older, much more dangerous, something buried deep beneath the earth. And if we couldn't stop it, if we couldn't find the heart of it, there would be no escaping the nightmare. We need to move quickly, Dr. Reynolds said, his voice sharp, breaking the silence. He stood by the control panel, his fingers already moving, pressing keys with mechanical precision. The longer we stay here, the stronger they get. We need to isolate the core of the infection before it spreads beyond this facility. I glanced at my mum, and she was still pale, her hands trembling. She hadn't said much since we entered this room, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She was barely holding it together, and I didn't blame her. We were surrounded by monsters, trapped in a facility with nowhere to run, and the only option we had was to dive deeper into the heart of the chaos. But there was no choice. We couldn't stay in the facility. We couldn't hide. Where are we going? Sheriff Baker asked, his voice still heavy with disbelief. How do we even begin to isolate this thing, whatever it is? Dr. Reynolds paused, his eyes flicking to the map of the facility that had popped up on the screen. He ran his finger along the glowing lines, tracing the path deeper into the facility. There's an underground level, he said, his voice steady. That's where the core of the operation was set up. It's the original research center. That's where we can find the heart of the infection. Underground? I asked, my stomach twisting. Is it safe? Dr. Reynolds gave me a tight, humorless smile. Nothing about this is safe, Alex, but it's our only shot. Without waiting for a response, he turned and began walking toward the far side of the room. The soldiers, those who had remained silent all this time, followed in quick step, their weapons at the ready. It wasn't just the creatures they were prepared for anymore. They were preparing for something bigger, something more sinister than we had even begun to understand. We followed Dr. Reynolds down a narrow hallway, and I could feel the temperature drop. The walls seemed to close in tighter with every step we took, the atmosphere growing heavier, more suffocating. I didn't know how much longer we could keep this up. It felt like we were heading toward the center of the earth itself, and the deeper we went, the more I could sense that something was watching us. The air was thick, unnatural, like it was alive. Stay close, Dr. Reynolds said, turning his head briefly to make sure we were still following. This part of the facility hasn't been used in years. It's been sealed off for a reason. What do you mean? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Reynolds' eyes darkened. When we first started the project, we thought we could control it. We thought we could contain the creatures. But what we didn't account for was how the land here, how it feeds them. The creatures, they were never just animals. They were vessels. They were carriers of something older, something buried under the ground. My mind was racing again. Buried under the ground. What is it? What's down there? You'll see soon enough, he said softly, his voice betraying a flicker of unease. We continued to move forward, and soon we reached a massive steel door, much larger and more reinforced than the others we had passed. Dr. Reynolds approached it, swiping a keycard to unlock it. The sound of the lock disengaging echoed through the hallway, and the door slowly creaked open with a loud groan. Beyond the door lay a dimly lit staircase leading down into the bowels of the facility. The temperature had dropped even further, and the air felt thick with something otherworldly. "I don't like this," Sheriff Baker muttered under his breath. "This feels wrong." "It is," Dr. Reynolds said, his voice barely audible. "But we have no choice." We descended the stairs, the echoes of our footsteps deafening in the stillness. The deeper we went, the heavier the air became. It was hard to breathe, as though something was pressing against my chest. And then, we reached the bottom. The door at the bottom of the stairs was massive, a giant steel barrier, unlike anything we'd seen before. Dr. Reynolds didn't hesitate. He moved to the door and placed his hand on a scanner next to it. The door shuddered, then slid open, revealing an enormous underground chamber. I couldn't believe my eyes. The room was vast, stretching farther than I could see, filled with rows of old, rusted equipment. But what made my blood run cold wasn't the equipment, it was what was in the center of the room. In the middle of the chamber was a large, circular pit, its walls lined with pipes and wires that hummed with a low, mechanical energy, and at the center of the pit, something was growing. "What is that?" I gasped, stepping back, instinctively grabbing my mom's hand. "It's the source," Dr. Reynolds said quietly, his voice strained. "This is where it all began." I looked closer. The thing at the center of the pit was unlike anything I had ever seen. It looked almost like a giant seed, pulsating with dark energy. Its surface was covered in a black, organic substance, squirming like it was alive. The very sight of it made my skin crawl. "This is what we've been dealing with," Dr. Reynolds said, his voice heavy with regret. "The creatures, the land, it's all connected to this. It feeds off the land, off the energy beneath us. We've been trying to contain it for years, but every time we thought we had it under control, it adapted, it changed. Suddenly, the ground beneath us trembled. The room shook, and I heard a distant roar, like the sound of something massive, awakening. "They're here," Dr. Reynolds whispered, his voice low with panic. "They've found us." The ground cracked open beneath us, and I could see the darkness growing, swelling like some ancient beast waking from a long slumber. The air grew thick with the smell of decay and rot. And then, the creature from Pine Hollow appeared. It was bigger now, stronger, its body more twisted than before. "This is it," Dr. Reynolds said, his voice shaking. "This is the heart of the nightmare." Before I could react, the creature lunged at us, its claws outstretched, its mouth gaping open to reveal rows of jagged teeth. "Run!" Sheriff Baker shouted, pulling me toward the exit. We didn't have time to think. We ran as fast as we could, hearing the creature's footsteps pounding behind us. The walls seemed to close in, but I couldn't stop. We had no choice. We had to escape. Part 20. The final courtroom shook again, a violent tremor that rattled the walls and nearly knocked me off my feet. My mind raced, but my body moved on instinct. I had to run. I had to survive. The sound of heavy footsteps and guttural growls filled the air, getting closer with every passing second. The creature, the one from Pine Hollow, was right behind us, its enormous claws scraping against the concrete floor. I could hear its breath, heavy and ragged, as it pursued us with deadly intent. "Move, now." Sheriff Baker's voice cut through the chaos, urgent and commanding. I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed my mom's hand, pulling her behind me as we sprinted down the hallway, the dim lights overhead flickering with each pounding step. The sounds of the creature grew louder, closer, and the walls around us seemed to bend with the weight of the terror pressing in. We reached the same narrow staircase we had descended only moments ago, but as we began to climb, I could feel the temperature drop. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, as if the very building was holding its breath, waiting for something awful to happen. Dr. Reynolds was leading the way, his face set in grim determination. His eyes were focused on the hallway ahead, but there was something else there too, a flicker of fear. He knew we weren't safe yet. He knew this was just the beginning. "Keep moving," he barked. "Get to the exit. We don't have much time." We moved as fast as we could, but the creature's growls echoed in the hall, and I could feel its presence bearing down on us. There was no escape. Not really. The walls of the facility felt like they were closing in on us with every step we took. The sound of the creature's claws scraping against metal grew louder, and I knew it was gaining on us. I didn't want to look behind me. I didn't want to see the thing chasing us, but I couldn't help it. I turned my head just in time to see the creature's shadow stretch across the hallway, its twisted form emerging from the darkness like some nightmare-made flesh. Its claws scraped the walls, leaving deep gouges as it stalked toward us, its mouth opening wider with every step. My heart was racing in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. We were almost there. I could see the exit ahead, the bright light of the outside world shining through the door. But the creature was closing in. I could feel it. Its presence was suffocating, a dark weight pressing on my chest. We reached the exit, but as Dr. Reynolds swung open the door, something slammed into us. The door rattled on its hinges, and I felt a searing pain in my side as I was thrown to the ground. "Get up," Sheriff Baker shouted. "Move." I struggled to my feet, my vision blurred with panic. I could hear the creature's breath, hot and foul, behind me. It was too close. There was no time. Suddenly, a flash of light blazed through the hallway. I turned to see soldiers pouring into the space, their weapons raised, firing into the darkness. But the creature didn't flinch. It didn't even slow down. It lunged forward, and in an instant, the soldiers were torn apart. Their screams echoed through the hallway, but I couldn't look away. I couldn't stop myself from running. "Get to the chopper," Dr. Reynolds yelled, his voice desperate. We sprinted out of the facility, the sounds of gunfire and screams ringing in our ears. The helicopter was waiting for us, its blades spinning violently, the wind whipping round us as we ran. I could see the soldiers in the helicopter, their faces grim as they held the door open for us. But as we reached the landing pad, something caught my eye. Another creature bigger than the last, its body twisting and contorting like it was made of shadow, emerged from the darkness, its eyes glowing with malice. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. It was like it was waiting for us, watching us. "Get in," Sheriff Baker yelled, pulling me by the arm. I didn't think, I didn't question. I climbed into the helicopter, my heart still pounding. The door slammed shut behind me, and as the helicopter lifted off the ground, I looked out. Through the small window, the creatures were everywhere, emerging from the woods, from the facility. They were crawling, running, howling into the night, their eyes fixed on the chopper as it rose higher and higher. I couldn't breathe. "We're not safe," I whispered, my voice trembling. "We can't outrun them. They're everywhere." Dr. Reynolds didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on the monitors in front of him, his face pale and drawn. "I told you," he said, his voice barely audible. "They'll keep coming. They won't stop until they've consumed everything. This wasn't just an experiment. This is ... This is their awakening." I didn't know what to say. There was no comfort in his words, no hope. The truth was clear now. There was no escaping it. The creatures were everywhere, and the world we had known was gone. We weren't the hunters, we were the prey. And no matter how far we ran, the nightmare was only just beginning. The helicopter soared through the night sky, but all I could think of was the creatures below, the ones still hunting, still searching, and the fear settled deep into my chest. We hadn't escaped, not really, and we weren't safe. Part 21. Whispers in the walls. Thick, musty air of the facility clung to us as we trudged deeper into the heart of the building. Dr. Reynolds led the way, his every step purposeful, though there was a subtle unease in the way he moved now. His usual calm composure had begun to crack under the weight of the truth he had revealed to us. Pine Hollow wasn't just the beginning, it was a part of something much larger, something far darker, and that something had begun to awaken. The sound of our footsteps echoed through the sterile hallways, but there was something wrong with the silence here. The deeper we went, the heavier the air seemed to become. The flickering fluorescent lights cast long shadows on the walls, but they didn't feel comforting. They felt oppressive, as if the very building itself was watching us, waiting for us to make the wrong move. The low hum of machinery was ever present, like the steady pulse of a heart, one that didn't belong to any human being. "What are we walking into?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, though I wasn't sure why I bothered to speak. It seemed like every sound I made, no matter how soft, was swallowed by the oppressive silence of the place. Dr. Reynolds didn't answer. At first, he kept his gaze straight ahead, his eyes fixed on the distant door at the end of the hallway. It was a heavy, steel door, reinforced, unyielding. My stomach tightened just looking at it. "We're walking into the truth," he finally said, his voice low and devoid of emotion. "But whether or not we can survive it, that remains to be seen." I glanced at my mother, who walked beside me, her grip on my hand tighter than ever. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. It was as if everything we had experienced up to this point had been a slow burn, a gradual realization of the nightmare we were part of. But now, with every step we took toward the heart of the facility, I could see it in her eyes. She knew this was it, the point of no return. Sheriff Baker, who had been unusually silent, finally spoke. "What exactly are we going to find in there?" His voice was steady, but I could hear the edge of concern in it. Even he, the tough, battle-hardened sheriff of Pine Hollow, couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Dr. Reynolds turned to him, his expression unreadable. "You'll see soon enough." The facility seemed to stretch on endlessly. We passed countless rooms, labs, research spaces, containment units, but none of them felt right. There was an unnatural stillness to the place, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the fear and sorrow of the countless experiments that had been conducted here. We arrived at the door. Dr. Reynolds didn't hesitate. He swiped his card, and the door slid open with a faint hiss, revealing a large room filled with monitors and equipment. But the sight that greeted us wasn't what I expected. It wasn't the sterile clinical environment I had imagined. Instead, the room was dark, dimly lit by a single overhead light that flickered erratically. And then I saw it. In the center of the room, surrounded by steel tables and vats of unknown substances, was something I could barely comprehend. It was a large, blackened, mass-twisted, malformed, with veins of crimson running through it like the roots of an ancient tree. But it wasn't the shape that disturbed me most. It was the feeling that radiated from it, a feeling of pure, ancient malevolence. Dr. Reynolds stepped forward, his hand hovering above a console. "This is where it all began," he said softly, almost reverently. "This is the source." I felt my blood run cold. "The source of what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He didn't reply at first. He just stood there, staring at the pulsating mass before him, like he was waiting for something. A moment passed before he spoke again. "They were never meant to be controlled," he said, his voice quiet. "They were supposed to be contained, studied, manipulated. But they've adapted. They've evolved." My stomach turned at his words. The creatures, the things we had seen in Pine Hollow, were part of this, part of whatever this mass was. I couldn't process it. It was like a nightmare, but it was real, and it was growing. Suddenly, the air grew thick, almost stifling. The temperature in the room dropped, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Something was wrong. I felt it in my gut. The room, the facility, it wasn't just a place of study. It was a tomb, a prison. "Dr. Reynolds," Sheriff Baker said, his voice shaking for the first time since I'd known him. "What are we supposed to do now? How do we stop this?" Dr. Reynolds turned to face him. "We don't stop it," he said flatly. "We can't stop it, but we can contain it." "Contain it?" Sheriff Baker repeated, his voice filled with disbelief. "After everything we've seen, everything that's happened, you're telling me we can just contain it?" Dr. Reynolds didn't answer. He just motioned for us to follow him. I hesitated, but then I saw the look in his eyes. This was no longer about saving Pine Hollow. This was about surviving something much bigger, something much darker. I followed him, knowing that there was no other choice. We passed through another set of doors and into a long corridor. The walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own, the air thick with a strange, metallic scent. The further we went, the more the feeling of dread weighed on my chest. It was like we were heading deeper into the heart of the earth, into something that had been buried for centuries. And then, I heard it, a whisper, faint at first, like the wind moving through the trees. But then it grew louder. A voice. It was calling me. I stopped in my tracks, my heart thudding in my chest. It wasn't just a whisper. It was a voice that felt like it was right behind me, in my ear, urging me forward. I turned to Dr. Reynolds. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't seem surprised. "It's the presence," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's been waiting, watching." The voice came again, louder now. My mind screamed at me to run, to turn back, but my body refused to obey. I could feel myself being drawn toward it, as though something invisible was pulling me forward. "We need to move? Now," Dr. Reynolds said, his voice urgent, but it was too late. The ground beneath us trembled, and I could feel the walls shifting, groaning. The voice was no longer a whisper. It was a roar, filling the air, filling my mind, and then everything went dark. Part 22. The awakening silence in the room felt unnatural, as though the very air was holding its breath. My pulse raced, my chest tightening with each passing second. I didn't know what had happened, how we had ended up here, in this place that felt so wrong. The lights flickered above us, casting erratic shadows on the walls that seemed to writhe like living things. It was as if the building itself was reacting to the presence of whatever had been awakened beneath our feet. I looked around at the others, but none of them seemed any less shaken than I felt. Dr. Reynolds was standing motionless, staring into the darkness where the last of the lights had vanished. His face, which had once carried a sense of cold confidence, now appeared, pale and strained. It was clear that something had changed. Whatever had been behind the containment, whatever had been hidden here, it was no longer under control. "We've gone too far," Sheriff Baker muttered under his breath. His eyes were wide with realization as the weight of Dr. Reynolds' words seemed to settle over him. This wasn't supposed to happen. We were never meant to awaken it. The voice had stopped, leaving only the deafening silence behind. But the silence felt wrong, heavy with a suffocating presence. Like something was still lurking in the shadows, watching us, waiting. Dr. Reynolds finally broke the silence, his voice almost lost in the deepened quiet. It was never supposed to be unleashed, not like this. He turned to us, his eyes hollow. "The creatures, they were just a beginning. But the real threat is far worse, far more ancient." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, though every fiber of my being screamed to get away, to run. But there was no escape. We were already too deep in it. "The land itself," Dr. Reynolds said, his words deliberate, slow. "It's alive. The creatures you've seen, the ones terrorizing Pine Hollow, are part of something bigger. The force beneath the ground is not just a source of power for them. It's the source of everything. It's the reason they're evolving faster than we could ever have imagined. It's been waiting for us to disturb it." The room seemed to pulse with each word he spoke. The realization of what we were dealing with hit me like a cold slap. The creatures weren't just the result of some twisted experiment gone wrong. They were connected to something much darker, something ancient, primal, and now it was awake, and we were the ones who had stirred it. "We've made a terrible mistake," Dr. Reynolds muttered, his voice cracking with the weight of his confession. "It's been under the earth for centuries, and now it's too late to stop it. The creatures are just the first sign of its awakening. They were only the beginning." I turned to my mom, but she couldn't meet my eyes. She was trembling, her face pale as the horror set in. There was nothing left to do but move forward, to face whatever came next. Sheriff Baker stepped forward, his eyes burning with a mix of determination and desperation. "What do we do now? You say we can't stop it, but surely there's a way to contain it, a way to fight back." Dr. Reynolds shook his head. "We've tried containment. We've tried studying them, but this is not something we can control. The only thing we can do now is survive. The only thing that might stop it is ... He paused, and I could feel the tension rise in the air, thick and suffocating. "Destroying the source," he finished, his words chillingly final. The source, the very thing that had been buried beneath the earth, hidden from mankind for centuries, was the key to everything. It was the heart of the nightmare that had unfolded in Pine Hollow. And now, it was waking up. Suddenly, the ground beneath us trembled again, this time with a force that shook the walls. The whole building seemed to groan, as if something deep beneath was stirring, pushing against the limits that had held it for so long. The air turned frigid, and I felt my breath freeze. In my chest, "What's happening?" I asked, my voice shaking. "It's coming," Dr. Reynolds said, his voice strained. "The awakening is complete. The creatures have fully adapted. They're no longer just confined to the land. They're connected to it. The presence is growing." I didn't understand what he meant by the presence. I didn't want to, but the way he said it, like the land itself was a living, breathing thing, waiting to consume us, made my blood run cold. Another rumble shook the floor, louder, this time accompanied by a horrific screech that sent shivers down my spine. It was coming from beneath the facility. Something massive, something ancient, was awakening. "They're here," Dr. Reynolds said, his voice barely audible. "And they're no longer just creatures, they're something else." The room seemed to pulse, the walls breathing with a life of their own. The monitors on the walls flickered, and I saw something in the corner of my vision. A movement, shadows stretching and writhing like living things. I stepped back, but the ground trembled again, and then I heard it. The sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate steps that echoed through the building, reverberating in my bones. The presence was close now. It wasn't just the creatures. It was something more. Something that had been lurking, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Dr. Reynolds turned to us, his face pale. "We have to move. Now." We didn't question him. There was no time. We ran, pushing through the hallways, past the containment units, and toward the back exit. But the walls were moving. The ground was shifting beneath us. The creatures were everywhere, flooding into the facility, their growls filling the air. We made it to the exit, but as I looked out through the glass door, I saw the figures emerging from the shadows. More of them. There were more creatures, more twisted, inhuman figures than I could have ever imagined. They were coming for us, and the worst part, they were no longer just animals. There was something else. They were part of the land itself. "Run," Sheriff Baker shouted, pulling me toward the truck waiting outside. But it was too late. The creatures had already arrived. Part 23. The darkened path howls outside the facility grew louder with each passing second. The walls seemed to vibrate with the force of the creatures' cries, sending tremors through the floor beneath our feet. I could feel it in my chest, that sickening weight of dread that pressed harder with every moment. The creatures were closing in on us, not just outside but inside the facility too. It wasn't just a matter of survival anymore. It was a race to escape the nightmare we had inadvertently unleashed. Sheriff Baker, his face pale and his eyes wild, kept us moving forward. "Get to the truck. Stay close. We don't stop for anything." His voice had a steely edge now, a man who had lost hope but was still determined to protect us. But how could he protect us from something like this? We pushed through the narrow corridors, the sound of our footsteps lost in the deafening growls that reverberated through the facility. The air grew thick, suffocating, as though the building itself was being consumed by the growing presence in the earth beneath us. The hum of the lights above flickered, casting fleeting shadows that seemed to stretch toward us like hungry hands. "Move, move," Sheriff Baker shouted, shoving me ahead of him. I didn't need to be told twice. We sprinted through the hallway, past the darkened labs where the twisted experiments had once been contained. Now, there were nothing but empty shells. The creatures had broken through, and everything inside had been corrupted by whatever force had been released. "We're almost there," Dr. Reynolds' voice cracked through the tension, and for a brief moment, I almost believed that we could make it out alive. But that hope was short-lived. A loud crash from behind us made my heart stop. The sound of something heavy slamming into the walls. Then, a scream, human or animal, I couldn't tell. It was an ear-piercing shriek that filled the hallway, made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. "Keep moving," Sheriff Baker barked, his hand firmly gripping my arm as he pulled me forward. I turned back just in time to see one of the creatures, massive and black, its body covered in patches of dark, mottled skin emerged from the shadows. Its eyes gleamed like burning coals, and its mouth opened in a grotesque grin. It was closer now, so much closer, but we didn't have time to stop. We reached the exit, the thick steel door that would lead us to the outside world. But just as Dr. Reynolds stepped up to unlock it, the door exploded outward with a deafening crash. "No," Dr. Reynolds shouted, diving backward as the door slammed against the wall, nearly knocking him off his feet. The sound of claws scraping against the metal door filled the air, followed by a guttural growl that sent chills through my spine. There was no time left. The creatures had breached the outer layer of the facility. We were trapped. "Get in the truck. Now," Sheriff Baker shouted, urgency in his voice. I didn't hesitate. My heart raced as I ran toward the truck, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the door. Mum was right behind me, and I could hear her breathing heavily, her footsteps quick but measured. We climbed into the truck, but just as I was about to slam the door shut, a massive shadow loomed over us. That the creature from before, the one with the twisted, contorted limbs, was standing in the doorway, its eyes locked onto mine. Its mouth opened, wider, revealing rows of sharp, broken teeth that looked as if they could tear through steel. It wasn't just the creature's size that terrified MIT, was the sheer intelligence behind its eyes. It was studying us, learning drive. Sheriff Baker ordered, his hand gripping the wheel as he gunned the engine. The truck lurched forward, the tires screeching as we tore away from the facility. But the creature didn't follow. It didn't need to. The others were already closing in. I looked out the rearview mirror as we sped down the road, my breath catching in my throat. The facility was quickly disappearing in the distance, but something felt wrong. The trees along the road seemed to move, their branches swaying unnaturally, as though they were reaching out toward us. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice shaking. Dr. Reynolds, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke, his voice low and strained. "We're heading to a safe zone, but I don't know how safe it will be. The creatures have adapted. They're not just attacking anymore, they're hunting, and they won't stop until they've found every last one of us." "What do you mean hunting?" I asked, the panic in my voice rising. "Are you saying they can track us?" Dr. Reynolds nodded slowly. "Yes, they've evolved. They can sense us now. They know where we are. They're not just animals anymore. They've become something else." I turned to my mum, but she didn't meet my gaze. She was staring out the window, her face pale and drawn. I could see the fear in her eyes, but there was something else there too. Something darker. She wasn't just scared, she was defeated. And that terrified me more than anything else. The truck bounced over the rough road, the engine roaring as we pushed further into the woods. The world outside was darkening quickly, and I could feel the tension building inside the truck. Whatever was happening, whatever had been unleashed, it wasn't going to stop. Not until it had consumed everything. "We need to find a way to stop them," Sheriff Baker said, his voice grim. "This isn't just about survival anymore. We need to figure out how to stop this before it spreads beyond Pine Hollow." Dr. Reynolds didn't respond immediately. Instead, he glanced at the monitors in front of him, his fingers tapping at the keys in a rapid motion. He was checking the tracking systems, looking for any signs of movement, but I could tell by the look on his face that he didn't expect to find anything good. "We're not going to make it," Dr. Reynolds said softly, his voice tinged with resignation. "It's already too late. We've already lost." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. For the first time since we'd been running, I felt the weight of the situation fully sink in. We were running away, trying to survive, but we weren't getting any closer to safety. We were just running from one nightmare to the next. A sudden, sharp screech from the trees caught my attention, and I glanced out the window. The sound came again, louder this time, like the cry of an animal in pain. But this wasn't an animal. It was something much worse. "Stop the truck," I yelled, my voice rising with panic. "Do you hear that?" Sheriff Baker slammed on the brakes, and the truck screeched to a halt. We all turned to look out the window, but the darkness was thick. The trees were shrouded in shadows, their branches twisting and bending in unnatural ways. And then I saw it, a figure, a silhouette, standing in the darkness, barely visible, but unmistakable. It was tall, taller than anything human should be, and its body was contorted in a way that made my stomach turn. "It's them," Dr. Reynolds whispered. "They've found us." Part 24. The Truth Beneath truck came to a screeching halt, the tires grinding against the dirt road as we braced ourselves for what was coming. I could hear the breath catch in my throat, the pounding of my heart growing louder with each passing second. Sheriff Baker's eyes flicked toward the rearview mirror, and I saw the terror flash in his gaze as he caught sight of the figure in the trees. "We need to go. Now," he shouted, his voice filled with urgency. But no one moved. We were frozen in place, staring at the shadow in the trees. It stood there, unmoving, its tall, contorted form barely visible in the darkness, but unmistakable. It was the same grotesque silhouette that had haunted us in Pine Hollow, but now it seemed bigger, more ominous. "Is that one of them?" I whispered, my voice shaking. Dr. Reynolds didn't answer at first. His eyes were fixed on the creature, and I could see his face tighten in horror. "Yes," he said quietly, his voice low and grim. "It's evolved. It's not just an animal anymore. It's something else, and it's coming for us." I turned to look at my mom. Her face was pale, her lips trembling as she stared at the creature through the truck window. Her hand clutched mine tighter, and I could feel the cold sweat on her palm. "We can't outrun it," I said, my voice breaking. "We're not going to make it." Sheriff Baker slammed his hand against the steering wheel, his frustration evident. "We have to try. We have to get to the extraction point. But Dr. Reynolds wasn't as sure. There's no guarantee the extraction point will save us, he said. His eyes narrowed with grim understanding. We're running out of time. They've adapted to the land. The creatures this force hits bigger than we thought. We're not dealing with simple predators anymore. The air inside the truck grew thick with tension, the weight of the situation pressing down on all of us. I could feel the walls closing in, the darkness outside swallowing us whole, and the growls of the creatures growing closer, louder. It was only a matter of time before they found us. Dr. Reynolds turned toward us, his expression hardening. You need to understand something. These creatures, they weren't just born of the land. They're part of it. They're the manifestation of something ancient, something primal. The force that's been waiting beneath the earth. Under Pine Hollow, it's not just a part of the creatures. It is the creatures. It's been feeding off them, evolving with them. And now, we've disturbed it. We've awakened something that was never meant to be unleashed. I felt my stomach turn as the weight of his words settled in. The land, the very earth we had walked on, had been feeding these creatures, fueling their evolution, and we were caught in the middle of it. We were fighting something that couldn't be stopped, something that had been sleeping for centuries. The figure in the trees took a step forward, its long limbs moving with a disturbing fluidity. It was more than a creature now. It was a force, a shadow that moved with purpose, with intelligence. We can't stop it, Dr. Reynolds continued, his voice barely audible. Not now. Not without risking everything. I turned to Sheriff Baker, my mind racing. What are we supposed to do? Then, just run. He didn't answer. He couldn't. The silence in the truck was deafening, broken only by the sound of the engine idling and the creature's footsteps growing closer. Then we heard it. A low, guttural growl. It wasn't just one creature anymore. It was many dozens, maybe hundreds. Their growls filled the air, shaking the ground beneath us. They were closing in, surrounding us, their eyes glinting in the darkness like a pack of hunters. We have to get to the facility, Sheriff Baker said, his voice tight with panic. If we don't, we're done for. I glanced out the rearview mirror again, and my heart sank. The figure in the trees had moved closer. Its eyes were locked on us now, glowing with malice. It wasn't just waiting for us to make a mistake. It was leading the others, guiding them to us, like it knew exactly where we were going. We're not going to make it, I said, the hopelessness creeping into my voice. This is it. But Dr. Reynolds wasn't done yet. He leaned forward in his seat, his face pale but determined. We can't give up now. There's a way out. There's a way to stop it. Stop what? I asked, my voice trembling. What do you mean? He didn't look at me. He was staring at the creature outside the truck. I've been working on a theory for years, he said, his voice low and urgent. A way to sever the connection between the creatures and the land. If we can get to the heart of it, if we can destroy the source, we might be able to stop them from evolving further. I didn't know what he meant by the heart of it, but I knew one thing for sure. We didn't have much time. The creatures were almost upon us. Where is this source? Sheriff Baker demanded. How do we get to it? Dr. Reynolds didn't answer right away. He just stared ahead, his eyes distant. Finally, he spoke, his words heavy with the weight of their implications. It's underground, he said. Deep beneath Pine Hollow. It's the source of everything, and it's been waiting for us to awaken it. Part 25. The depths of despaired truck lurched forward, its wheels kicking up a cloud of dirt and dust as we sped down the winding road, heading toward the facility. The growls and howls of the creatures echoed in the distance, their monstrous shapes moving through the trees like shadows, and the weight of the nightmare pressing in on us. Every minute that passed felt like an eternity, and the air inside the truck seemed to grow thicker, suffocating us with dread. Mum's grip tightened around my hand, her fingers digging into my skin, but her face was pale, devoid of color. She was terrified. I could see it in her eyes, but there was something else there too, a quiet, unspoken resignation. She knew, as did I, that we weren't just running from monsters. We were running from something much bigger, something far older. And whatever we were heading toward, I knew it wasn't going to offer us the salvation we so desperately hoped for. Dr. Reynolds, I said, my voice breaking the silence. You said there's a way to stop this, to stop them. But what if it's already too late? What if the creatures have already spread beyond Pine Hollow? Dr. Reynolds didn't respond at first. He just kept his eyes on the road, his expression unreadable. I could tell he was deep in thought, the wheels in his mind turning as he processed everything that had happened, everything we'd been through. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but filled with grim resolve. "It's not too late," he said. His words weighted with certainty. "The creatures are evolving faster than we anticipated, but the source, the heart of this nightmare is still contained. If we can destroy it, we can sever their connection to the land, to the force that's been empowering them, but we need to move quickly. We don't have much time. We've got to get to that underground facility," Sheriff Baker said, his voice tight with urgency. "But we can't just rush in there. If this place is as dangerous as you say, we'll be walking right into a death trap." Dr. Reynolds nodded, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror as he checked for any signs of the creatures following us. "You're right. The facility is heavily fortified, but it's also where everything began. The creatures, the land there, all connected to what's underground. We need to find the heart of it, and we need to destroy it before they can adapt any further." I felt a chill run down my spine. The heart of it. What did that even mean? What was down there that had such power over the creatures? And how were we supposed to destroy something so ancient, so deeply ingrained in the land itself? Suddenly, a loud crash from behind us made me jump. I turned to see the figure, the creature standing at the edge of the trees, its silhouette towering over the truck. It was as if it had been waiting for us to stop. It stepped forward with a slow, deliberate gait, its long limbs moving in an unnatural rhythm. Its black eyes gleamed with malice as it stared us down, its mouth opening wider, revealing rows of jagged teeth. "Keep going," Sheriff Baker shouted, slamming his foot on the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, but the creature was too fast. It moved with an unnatural speed, its long, bony limbs propelling it toward us in an instant. I could feel its presence, like a dark cloud, pressing in on us from all sides. The truck swerved as we hit a bend in the road, narrowly avoiding the creature as it lunged toward the vehicle. It let out a horrific screech, its claws scraping against the truck's side, leaving deep gouges in the metal. "Hang on," Sheriff Baker barked, his voice frantic as he steered the truck back onto the road. The creature was still chasing us, its howl echoing through the night. We reached the facility, the towering gates of steel looming ahead like the gates of a fortress. As we neared the entrance, I saw soldiers standing at attention, their weapons raised, ready to defend the facility. But even as they stood there, their faces grim, I could see the doubt in their eyes. They knew, just as we did, that we were facing something far beyond their training, far beyond their ability to control. Dr. Reynolds was the first to jump out of the truck, his eyes scanning the area around us. "We need to get inside, now," he ordered, his voice sharp with urgency. We followed him, moving quickly but cautiously, the sounds of the creatures still echoing in the distance. As we entered the facility, I could feel the weight of the world pressing down on me. We had no idea what we were walking into. We had no idea how we were going to stop the creatures or if we could even survive long enough to try. The halls of the facility were cold, sterile, and eerily silent. The lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows on the walls as we made our way deeper into the heart of the complex. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end, and the sense of unease grew with each step we took. Dr. Reynolds led us to a small, unmarked door at the end of the hallway. He swiped his keycard, and the door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a small, dimly lit room. Inside were more monitors, more screens, and a massive tank in the center of the room, filled with a strange, pulsating liquid. "This is it," Dr. Reynolds said, his voice low, almost reverent. "This is where the heart of it all began." I stepped closer to the tank, my heart pounding in my chest. Inside the tank was something that looked almost human, but not quite. Its body was covered in twisted black veins, and its face was obscured by a mask of fleshy tendrils. It was almost as if it was sleeping, its chest rising and falling with each shallow breath. But even in its dormant state, I could feel the power radiating from it. "This is what we're up against," Dr. Reynolds said, his voice tight. "The creatures, the land, the force that's been controlling them, it all comes from here. This is the source. And if we don't destroy it, they will continue to evolve. They'll continue to spread." I felt a shiver run down my spine. The source, the thing that had been feeding the creatures, empowering them, was right in front of us. And now, it was up to us to destroy it before it could consume everything. Sheriff Baker stepped forward, his expression grim. How do we destroy it? Dr. Reynolds didn't hesitate. We need to sever its connection to the land. If we can break the bond, we can destroy it, but we need to act quickly. We don't know how much time we have. The ground beneath our feet suddenly trembled, a deep rumble shaking the facility to its core. The walls groaned, and I could hear the sound of something moving through the air vents above us. "They're here," Dr. Reynolds said, his voice barely audible. "They've found us." I didn't need to ask who they were. The creatures, the nightmare we had been running from, were closing in. We were trapped, and there was only one way out. But that one way, the only hope we had left, was buried beneath the earth, in the heart of the nightmare itself. Part 26. The heart of the nightmare. The air around us was thick with an almost tangible fear. My breath came in shallow gasps, and every step forward felt like a struggle against an invisible force trying to pull me back. We were in the heart of it now, the center of the nightmare, where everything had begun and everything would end. The room we stood in was dimly lit, the flickering lights above casting long shadows on the cold concrete walls. The hum of the machinery filled the silence, but there was something else beneath it all, a low, guttural vibration that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. I looked around, my eyes scanning the monitors that lined the walls. The screens flickered with images of the creatures' twisted, grotesque shapes moving in and out of the shadows. They were everywhere, and they were getting stronger. Dr. Reynolds stepped forward, his eyes never leaving the tank in the center of the room. "This is it, the source of everything. The creatures, the land, the force that controls them. It all starts here." I felt my stomach churn at the sight of the creature inside the tank. It looked almost human, but not quite. Its body was covered in dark veins, its skin stretched tight like it had been pulled too far, too thin. Its face was a mass of twisted, contorted flesh, with eyes that were too wide and too dark. It was like a nightmare made real, a thing that shouldn't exist. Yet, there it was, pulsating softly in the tank. "This is the heart of it all," Dr. Reynolds continued, his voice almost reverent. "It was supposed to be controlled, contained, but it's far beyond that now. It's alive, it's part of the land, and it's feeding off everything around it." "Feeding," I echoed, my voice cracking with disbelief. "Feeding off what?" Dr. Reynolds didn't look at me. He didn't need to. He knew I wasn't asking to understand. I wasn't asking for answers. I was asking for a way out. "They're not just animals. They were never just animals," he said, his voice cold now, like he was speaking to himself. "They were created, yes, but they were also chosen, brought to life by something older. The land itself, Pine Hollow, this place, the creatures, they're all connected to it. It's a force older than humanity, older than civilization. It's been here for centuries, maybe longer. And he stopped, his words trailing off as his eyes flicked toward the tanks. I could see the fear in his eyes now, something he had kept hidden for so long. The truth was too terrible, even for him. "This is our last chance to stop it," he said finally. "We have to destroy the source before it's too late." "Destroy it how?" Sheriff Baker demanded, his voice laced with desperation. "We don't even know what this thing is. How can we destroy it if we don't understand it?" Dr. Reynolds didn't answer at first. He just stared at the tank, his fingers twitching as if he was weighing his options, calculating the risk. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and grim. "By severing the connection, the creatures, they're not just biological, they're conduits. The force beneath the ground, the presence that's been feeding them, it's tied to the land itself. We have to break that tie. If we can destroy the source of that connection, the creatures will stop evolving. They'll die." I felt a surge of hope, but it was quickly replaced with doubt. Could it really be that simple? If it was, why hadn't anyone tried it before? "We've been trying," Dr. Reynolds said, almost reading my thoughts. "We thought we had it under control, but we didn't understand. The land itself is what gives them power. The creatures are just its vessels. And now, the vessel has grown too strong. We can't kill them by conventional means. But if we destroy the source, we can stop them." I turned to Sheriff Baker. He looked just as lost as I felt. "How do we destroy it?" he asked, his voice rough. Dr. Reynolds turned to us, his face hard. "There's a ritual," he said. "It's not just physical, it's spiritual. The creatures, the land, the foresights all tied to the land's energy. To destroy the source, we have to sever that connection. We have to destroy the energy that fuels them." I felt a chill run down my spine. A ritual. It sounded more like something out of a nightmare than a real solution. How do we perform it? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Dr. Reynolds glanced at me, his eyes cold and unreadable. We need to get to the heart of it, the place where the energy is strongest. There's a cave deep beneath the facility. It's the source of the power. If we can get there and perform the ritual, we can stop the creatures. We can end this. Where is this cave? Sheriff Baker asked, his voice filled with urgency. Dr. Reynolds pointed toward the far end of the room, where a steel door stood, partially open down there. He said, the cave is below us. It's where everything began, and it's where it will all end. I looked at my mum. She was standing silently beside me, her face pale and drawn. She hadn't said anything since we entered the room, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She knew, just like I did, that there was no going back now. Whatever we were about to face, we were facing it together. We don't have much time, Dr. Reynolds said, snapping me out of my thoughts. We need to move. The creatures are already here. They're closing in. The walls trembled again, and I heard the faint sound of claws scraping against metal. They were coming. We had no choice but to move forward. Let's go, Sheriff Baker said, his voice steady. We don't have time to waste. Part 27. The cave beneath air inside the facility was thick with tension. Every sound, every footstep, every creak of the building seemed to reverberate in the silence. As we moved deeper into the bowels of the complex, my heart pounded. With fear and anticipation, Dr. Reynolds led the way. His steps quick but measured, though I could see his hands trembling slightly as he gripped his weapon. Sheriff Baker followed closely behind, his eyes constantly scanning the dimly lit corridor for any signs of danger. My mum was next to me, her hand still clutching mine, her grip tight and desperate. I didn't know what to expect when we reached the cave. I didn't even understand what we were really up against. But what I did know was that we had no choice but to move forward. The creatures, whatever they were closing in on us. The air felt thick, like the entire building was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. We reached the end of the corridor, where a massive steel door stood, slightly ajar. The faint hum of machinery filled the air, but there was something else too, a strange buzzing sound, like an electric current running through the walls. Dr. Reynolds paused for a moment, his eyes flicking between the door and the group. We're here, he said quietly, his voice heavy with dread. This is where it all began. I looked at the door, feeling the weight of its ominous presence. It wasn't just a door, it was the gateway to something far darker, something we weren't prepared to face. My stomach churned as we stepped forward, the darkness beyond the door swallowing us whole. Dr. Reynolds swiped his keycard, and the door groaned as it slowly slid open, revealing a long staircase descending into a deep dark pit. The air grew colder the further we went down, and I could feel the weight of the earth pressing down on us. It wasn't just the descent into the cave that terrified me. It was the sense that something was waiting for us, something ancient, something far older than any of us could comprehend. Stay close, Dr. Reynolds said, his voice low. This place hasn't been touched in years. It's been sealed off for a reason. Sheriff Baker asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. Dr. Reynolds didn't answer immediately. His eyes were focused ahead, his face grim. Because whatever is down there, it's not something you want to deal with. It's the source of everything, the creatures, the land, the force that's been feeding them. It all leads back to this cave. My heart skipped a beat. The source, everything we had seen, everything we had encountered, was connected to this place. And now, we were about to face whatever had been buried here, waiting for us to come. We reached the bottom of the stairs, and I gasped. The cave stretched out before us, an enormous underground chamber filled with strange, twisted shapes. There were metal pipes running along the walls, and glowing green lights flickered in the corners. But it wasn't the machinery that made my skin crawl, it was the thing in the center of the cave, at the heart of the chamber. Surrounded by a massive, circular pit, was the source. A large, pulsating mass of flesh and veins, its surface slick and black, like oil. The thing was alive, its movements slow and deliberate, like it was breathing, waiting. And as I looked at it, I felt something shift in the air, a presence that was darker, older, and more malevolent than anything I had ever known. This is it, Dr. Reynolds said, his voice barely audible. This is the heart of the nightmare. I stepped forward, my body trembling. The creature, if you could call it, that seemed to sense us. Its surface rippled, like it was waking up. I couldn't take my eyes off it. I felt drawn to it, like it was calling to me, beckoning me closer. But I knew that if I stepped any closer, I might never return. What do we do now? I asked, my voice shaky. How do we stop it? Dr. Reynolds didn't answer immediately. He stepped closer to the pit, his eyes fixed on the mass at the center. We have to sever its connection to the land, he said finally. The creatures, the force, it's all tied to this puffle. If we can destroy it, we can stop them. We can stop it all. I didn't understand. How could we destroy something like this? It wasn't even human. It wasn't anything we could comprehend. We can't just destroy it, can we? Sheriff Baker asked, his voice strained. What if we make it worse? What if we release something worse than we've already seen? Dr. Reynolds turned to face him, his expression hardening. There's no other choice, Sheriff. The creatures are already spreading. If we don't stop it here, it will continue to grow. It will consume everything. The land, the creatures there, all connected to this thing. And if we don't sever the connection, we're done. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. There was no turning back now. We had to destroy it. We had no other choice. Dr. Reynolds pulled a small device from his pocket, a strange, metallic object with a series of buttons and dials. He stepped closer to the pit, holding it out in front of him. This is the device that will sever the connection. It's designed to disrupt the energy that binds the creatures to the land. Once we activate it, it will destroy the heart of the nightmare. I felt my heart race as Dr. Reynolds approached the mass, his hand trembling as he held the device. He pressed a button, and the hum of machinery filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. The creature in the pit seemed to react, its surface rippling in response to the disturbance. Now, Dr. Reynolds shouted, "Dot." The device activated with a sharp, high-pitched sound, and I felt the ground beneath me tremble. The creature in the pit let out a horrendous scream, a sound so loud and so filled with rage that it shook the walls of the cave. The mass writhed, twisting violently as if it were being torn apart from the inside. The veins that ran through its surface began to glow, pulsating with an unnatural light. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest as the cave seemed to come alive around us. The walls groaned, the air growing thick with a strange, metallic scent. The ground shook beneath our feet, and I could hear the sounds of the creatures, no longer just the ones from Pine Hollow, but more, many more coming for us. We've got to go, Dr. Reynolds said, his voice urgent. It's not over yet. But as he spoke, the ground beneath us cracked, and I felt the floor give way. The massive pit in the center of the cave seemed to swallow everything, pulling the walls inward as it collapsed. Run, Sheriff Baker shouted. We didn't need any more encouragement. We turned and bolted for the exit. The sound of the cave collapsing around us, the walls shook, the very earth groaning as the nightmare we had unleashed tried to pull us back in. But we didn't stop. We couldn't. Part 28. The collapse's ground trembled beneath our feet as we ran, the vibrations sending waves of panic through my body. Every step I took felt like I was fighting against the earth itself, like the very ground was trying to swallow us whole. The cave, the facility, the very walls we had just passed through, everything was coming apart. The nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun. We can't stop. Keep running, Sheriff Baker yelled, his voice strained with fear and urgency. His footsteps were fast, his breath labored, but he never slowed. We were all running as if our lives depended on it because they did. The walls were crumbling, cracks spreading like veins across the stone, and the sound of the earth breaking apart echoed all around us. The rumbling was deafening, and I could feel the ground shifting beneath me, as if it were alive, reacting to the destruction we had unleashed. I glanced behind me. Every part of the facility seemed to be collapsing in on itself. The ceiling above us was caving in, and pieces of debris were falling, scattering in all directions. Dr. Reynolds was ahead of us, his face pale but determined. He didn't look back, he just kept running, his eyes locked on the exit. I followed, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't quite process. We reached the corridor that led to the surface. The light from the emergency lights flickered on and off, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The hallway was narrow, and I could feel the air growing thicker with each passing second. The sound of distant growls and scratching filled the air, and I knew whatever had been contained in the facility had broken free. The creatures were loose. We couldn't stop, we had no choice but to push forward, the escape route being our only hope. But as we neared the exit, I heard something that froze me in my tracks. A scream human, a shrill, agonized cry that echoed through the hallway, sending a jolt of dread through me. I stopped, my body paralyzed with fear. "What was that?" I whispered, my voice shaky. Mom grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with terror. "We have to go, Alex, it's not safe." But I couldn't move. That scream, there was something so familiar about it, something I couldn't place, but it gnawed at the edges of my mind. "Alex, we need to go," Mom cried, pulling me forward, but I didn't want to leave. The scream was still ringing in my ears, and the instinct to go back, to find the source of it, was overwhelming. I could feel my pulse racing, my hands clammy with sweat. I didn't know if it was a trap, if the scream was meant to lure us in, but something about it felt real. It felt like someone was in pain, someone we knew. "Please," I begged, "I have to check." Mom's face was twisted in fear, but she nodded reluctantly. "We don't have much time, Alex. We go together, now." Sheriff Baker was ahead, his face set with grim determination, but when he saw us hesitate, he stopped, turning back. "What are you doing?" he snapped. "I heard something," I said, my voice tight. "It's a scream. Someone's out there." "You heard wrong," Sheriff Baker said, his tone hard. "There's no time to waste. We need to leave now. The place is coming down around us." But I couldn't ignore it. I had to know. "Just let me check," I pleaded. For a long moment, Sheriff Baker's eyes searched my face, reading the panic in my eyes. Finally, with a sigh, he nodded. "1 minute, but then we're leaving, understood?" I nodded, though my heart was already pounding in my chest. I turned back down the hallway toward the source of the scream. I could still hear it echoing in the distance, but it was fainter now, like it was fading. But even then, it pushed me forward. We crept down the hallway, the sound of our footsteps drowned by the groaning of the building and the growls that seemed to come from every direction. We rounded a corner, and that's when I saw it. A body twisted and broken, lying in a pool of blood. I recognized the man immediately. It was one of the soldiers from the convoy. His eyes were wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling, his mouth frozen in a silent scream. I stopped dead in my tracks, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just the gruesome sight of the body, it was the thing that had done this. The blood was still fresh. The body hadn't been dead long. Whatever had attacked him was still nearby. "We need to go," Sheriff Baker said urgently, his voice cutting through my paralysis. But I couldn't look away. The body was grotesque, but there was something else. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. It wasn't just the creature I was afraid of, it was the feeling that something was watching us. Something, or someone, was waiting. The ground beneath us shifted again, the sound of scraping metal growing louder. I looked up, and that's when I saw it. The door at the end of the hallway, the one we needed to go through, was shaking, as though something was slamming against it from the other side. "Run!" Dr. Reynolds shouted. I didn't need to be told twice. We turned and ran, the urgency in our footsteps matching the terror in the air. We sprinted toward the exit, the walls seeming to close in on us as the growls and scratching grew louder. Closer. We were almost there when the door to the hallway burst open, and standing in the doorway was a figure, tall, dark and twisted, its limbs contorted in impossible angles. It was one of them, one of the creatures, but it wasn't just the size that made my blood run cold. It was the eyes, the black, soulless eyes that seemed to recognize us. It was looking at me. Before I could react, Sheriff Baker's gun was in his hand, and he fired. The shot rang out, deafening in the confined space. But the creature didn't flinch. It didn't even seem to care. It just moved forward, its long claws scraping against the floor with a horrible screech. We couldn't outrun it. We couldn't stop it. "Move, Alex," Mom shouted, grabbing my arm and pulling me back toward the exit. We ran, but I could hear the creature's footsteps behind us, closing in with every passing second. There was no way we could make it out of here. There was no way we could survive. But just as I thought we were finished, a brilliant light blazed across the hallway. I turned just in time to see another convoy of trucks, military grade, barreling toward us. They had arrived. They were here to extract us. But as the vehicles skidded to a halt, I saw something that made my stomach churn. The same creatures, more of them, were emerging from the trees, their eyes glowing in the dark. They're not here to save us, Dr. Reynolds whispered, his voice strained with disbelief. They are here to finish what we started. Part 29. The unraveling convoy's headlights cut through the night, illuminating the twisted figures emerging from the trees, their glowing eyes locked onto us. The familiar rumble of military trucks and armored vehicles had been the lifeline I thought we needed, the salvation we so desperately hoped for. But as the engines roared to a halt, a sickening realization washed over me. These weren't the soldiers sent to rescue us. They were here for something else. Get inside, one of the soldiers barked, waving us toward the vehicles. His voice was cold, devoid of any warmth, and I could see the steel in his eyes as he motioned for us to move quickly. Mum's hand gripped mine tighter as we ran toward the truck, my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps of the creatures were getting closer, their eerie growls rising in pitch. But the soldiers were already making their way toward the woods, forming a perimeter as they readied their weapons. Their movement was practiced, rehearsed, and it sent a shiver of unease through me. These men weren't acting like soldiers tasked with saving civilians, they were acting like hunters, and I was the prey. Come on, Alex, we need to go, Sheriff Baker shouted, his voice cutting through my confusion. But I couldn't just move. Something was wrong. The way these soldiers were acting, it felt off. It wasn't just the fear and panic on their faces. It was something deeper. They didn't seem shocked by the creatures, by the chaos. They seemed prepared, too prepared. We climbed into the back of one of the armored trucks. The moment the door slammed shut, I could feel the air grow heavier, as if the truck itself had become a tomb. There was a strange hum coming from the truck's systems, and the walls felt thick, almost oppressive. I turned to look at Dr. Reynolds, but he wasn't sitting with us. He was at the front with the driver, speaking in low tones with another soldier. I could see his face, tight with anxiety, his eyes darting around the truck as if waiting for something. Who are they? I whispered to Mom, my voice trembling. I don't know, she whispered back, her voice barely audible. But I think they've been tracking us. I glanced at the soldiers again. They were still forming a perimeter, some of them communicating with each other through radios, while others kept their weapons trained on the trees. The shadows, the ever-encroaching darkness, the growls were growing louder, and the fear in the soldiers' eyes seemed genuine, but there was something about their behavior that didn't sit right with me. Sheriff, I called out, but he was already moving toward the front of the truck, joining Dr. Reynolds in conversation with the soldier at the wheel. My eyes turned to the rearview mirror, and that's when I saw it. A figure, tall, too tall, moving in the shadows just outside the convoy. I had seen that figure before. I knew it. It was the same creature that had haunted us in Pine Hollow, but this one was different. Its shape was more defined, its movements quicker and more deliberate, like it was no longer just hunting. It was leading the others. I could feel its eyes on me, watching us as we sat in the truck, waiting for the right moment to strike. I started, but the words caught in my throat. Mom's eyes followed mine, and her breath caught in her chest when she saw it too. It's one of them, she whispered, her voice quivering. It's not human anymore. Before I could process it, the truck lurched forward, jerking me back in my seat. The engines roared to life as we began moving through the dense forest. The figures, the creatures, were closing in, following the trucks, their growls turning into howls. The sound of their claws scraping against the ground echoed through the woods, growing louder with each passing second. Hold on, the soldier driving the truck yelled, his voice strained. I didn't have time to respond. The truck was speeding through the forest now, the wheels spinning over the uneven terrain, the vehicle jerking and bouncing with every turn. The trees blurred past us, the sound of the creature's growls rising behind us, like a pack of wolves, closing in on their prey. But the soldiers didn't seem afraid. They didn't seem panicked at all. Instead, they were silent, their eyes fixed ahead, their weapons ready. They weren't just fighting to survive, they were hunting. I turned to Dr. Reynolds, my fear growing with every second we sped through the trees. What is this? What are they really here for? Dr. Reynolds didn't meet my gaze. He stared out the front window, his face a mask of cold calculation. The Foundation, he said, his voice low and grim. They've been tracking these creatures for years, but they've been tracking us too. We're not the first town to face this. Pine Hollow was just the beginning. I didn't understand. How could this be happening? How could everything we thought was real have been a lie? Dr. Reynolds turned to face me then, his eyes sharp. You need to understand something. These creatures aren't just the result of some scientific experiment. They were created for a purpose. The land, the energy, the creatures themselves, they're all part of an experiment far bigger than any of us. And we were the test subjects. We were always meant to be part of this. The creatures, the horrors we've seen, they're part of a larger plan. A larger plan. My mind reeled, unable to comprehend the magnitude of his words. I turned to look at Sheriff Baker, but even he seemed lost now. The man who had always been so sure, so steadfast, had no answers. No one did. What do you mean? I asked, my voice shaking. What is the plan? Dr. Reynolds didn't answer immediately. He turned his gaze back to the front, his lips pressed tight. There's something buried beneath the land in Pine Hollow, he said, his voice strained. A power, a force that has been waiting for centuries. The creatures are the vessels, but they aren't just creatures. They are manifestations of that force. And once the Foundation started to track them, they realized something. They couldn't control it. They couldn't stop it. The words hit me like a freight train. We were never meant to escape this. We were never meant to survive. We were just pawns in a much bigger game. We need to get to the extraction point, Dr. Reynolds said quickly, his tone hard. But we need to do it before it's too late. They've already spread beyond Pine Hollow. They're coming for everything. Part 30. The breaking point truck roared through the forest, bouncing violently over the uneven terrain as the trees blurred past us. The air inside the vehicle was thick with tension, every breath heavy with the weight of what Dr. Reynolds had just revealed. My mind raced, struggling to process his words. But no matter how much I tried, one thing was painfully clear. We were never meant to survive this. The creatures, the forces at play, they were part of something much darker, something that had been waiting for centuries to rise. And now, we were stuck in the middle of it, with no way out. I glanced at my mum. She was staring out the window, her face pale, her lips trembling. Her hand gripped mine tightly, but I could feel the fear radiating from her. She wasn't just afraid of the creatures, she was afraid of something much worse. And I knew, deep down, she was starting to realize what I had feared all along. There was no escape. The growls from behind us grew louder, the sound of the creatures' claws scraping against the earth, like an army closing in on us. But the soldiers in the convoy seemed unfazed. Their eyes were fixed ahead, their weapons steady in their hands. They weren't afraid, they were prepared. They were hunting. We need to get to the extraction point, Dr. Reynolds said again, his voice strained. His eyes darted back and forth between the rearview mirror and the road ahead, scanning for any sign of danger. That's our only shot. What's really going on, Dr. Reynolds? Sheriff Baker's voice cut through the tension. He had been quiet for a while, his usual calm demeanor slipping away, replaced by something darker. You said this wasn't just about survival. What's the real reason you're here? Dr. Reynolds didn't immediately answer. His hands tightened around the controls of the truck, his knuckles white as he gripped the wheel. The tension in the vehicle was palpable, the heavy atmosphere pressing down on all of us like a lead weight. We're here because the creatures are the key to something much bigger, Dr. Reynolds said, his voice quiet, as if he was confessing something he didn't want to admit. They're not just animals, they're conduits. The land itself, the presence beneath the earth, is what's empowering them. And now, it's spreading. It's not just the creatures, it's the land. We never meant to release it. Release what? I asked, my voice shaking. What exactly is this force you're talking about? What's been sleeping beneath Pine Hollow all these years? Dr. Reynolds' eyes flicked to me, his expression grim. It's not just a creature or a force, it's an ancient power. Something that has been buried for centuries, perhaps millennia. The creature's what you've seen there, just its manifestation. The land is its vessel, and he was cut off by a sudden screeching sound, followed by a loud crack as the front of the truck jerked to the side. My stomach lurched as the vehicle skidded dangerously on the wet ground. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on us, the terror, the desperation, and it was clear we were being hunted. Everyone hold on, Sheriff Baker shouted, as the truck swerved again, narrowly missing a large tree that seemed to spring out of nowhere. The creatures were close, so close now, and their growls were no longer distant. They were right behind us, their twisted forms closing the gap faster than we could outrun them. Dr. Reynolds slammed the accelerator, pushing the truck forward as the engine roared, but I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't just trying to escape the creatures, he was trying to outrun something far worse, something that none of us could understand. "We need to get to the extraction point," Dr. Reynolds said again, but this time his voice held an edge of desperation. "The sooner we get there, the better. If we can make it to the facility, we might have a chance." The facility, the same facility that had contained the creatures, the same place that had brought us to this hell in the first place. But there was no time to think about that now. The convoy sped through the trees, the creatures still following us, their twisted, elongated limbs weaving through the darkness. The noise of their growls filled the air, growing louder as they closed in. "Get ready," Sheriff Baker shouted. "We're almost there." But as the convoy neared the facility, something happened. The trees around us seemed to shift. The ground beneath the trucks trembled again, only this time it wasn't just the weight of the creatures, it was something else. A low, deep rumble, like the earth itself was waking up. I could feel it in my chest. The ground was alive, and then I saw it. The edge of the woods. It wasn't just a break in the trees, it was a massive rift, a deep scar in the earth, as if the land had been torn open. The rift stretched for miles, cutting through the forest like an open wound. "We've reached the heart of it," Dr. Reynolds said, his voice filled with a mix of awe and terror. "This is where it all began, and it's where it ends." I felt my stomach churn. The rift, the crack in the earth, it wasn't just a geographical anomaly. It was the source, the heart of the nightmare. Whatever was causing this, whatever had awakened beneath Pine Hollow, was tied to that rift. And if we didn't stop it now, it would consume everything. The convoy stopped at the edge of the rift, the headlights casting long shadows on the ground. Soldiers jumped out, their weapons raised, scanning the area for threats. Dr. Reynolds stepped out of the truck, his eyes locked on the rift. He didn't hesitate. He moved forward, walking toward the edge of the massive crack in the earth. "This is it," he said, turning to face us. "This is where we finish this." Sheriff Baker looked at him, his face hard with resolve. "And how do we stop it? How do we stop the land from spreading?" Dr. Reynolds took a deep breath, his face grim. "We sever its connection to the land. The creature's there, the conduit, but the rift is the source. If we can destroy it, we can destroy them." As he said it, the earth trembled again, but this time it wasn't just the rift. It was the creatures closing in on us, their growls filling the air. We didn't have much time. The extraction point, the one safe place we had been promised, was no longer an option. We were on our own now. Dr. Reynolds stepped closer to the rift, his hands trembling as he reached for a small device at his waist. "This is it," he said, his voice quiet. "This is the key to stopping them." As he activated the device, a bright blue light shot out, illuminating the rift. The earth groaned in response, and for a moment, I thought we had failed. The creatures were already too close. But then, something happened. The rift began to close, slowly, as though the earth itself was healing. But it wasn't over. The creatures lunged at us. Part 31. The final confrontation there, inside the facility, seemed to thicken with every passing second. The low hum of the machines drowned out by the deafening roar of the creatures closing in. The walls, now visibly warped, seemed to pulse, as if the building itself were alive, reacting to the impending storm. I could hear the clawing sound, scraping, scratching, getting louder as the creatures approached from all sides, their growls reverberating through the walls like an impending thunderstorm. "Move, now," Sheriff Baker shouted, his voice sharp with urgency. His hand was tight on my arm, pulling me along as the others scrambled to follow him. But there was no escape. No matter how fast we ran, the creatures were closing in, their twisted forms just beyond the dim light of the hallway. They were faster now, their grotesque bodies more agile than before, and their eyes, those black, soulless eyes, were fixed on us, tracking our every move. They weren't just hunting anymore, they were herding us, corralling us into a final, inescapable confrontation. "Get to the control room," Dr. Reynolds ordered, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking any louder would draw the attention of the creatures faster. "We need to activate the lockdown before they break through." I felt the panic rising in my chest as we pushed through the dark corridors, the walls closing in around us. There was a sense of claustrophobia now, as though the very facility we were in was becoming our prison. The floor beneath us seemed to shake with each thundering step of the creatures, and I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, wondering if I would be the next one to be taken. Suddenly, the ground trembled, more violently, the metal doors at the end of the hallway rattling as if something enormous was slamming against them from the other side. The creatures weren't just banging on the door, they were trying to get in, clawing, scratching, grunting as they tore through the walls. The door to the control room opened with a sharp hiss, and we rushed inside. The dim glow from the monitors was the only light, casting long, eerie shadows across the sterile room. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I turned to face Dr. Reynolds, whose face was tight with determination. "This is it," Dr. Reynolds said, his voice low. "We have to seal this place off. We need to trigger the lockdown protocol, now, or we're all dead." Sheriff Baker immediately started moving toward the control panel, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. "And if that doesn't work, what then?" Dr. Reynolds turned to face him, his gaze unyielding. "Then we'll be sealed in here with them. But we have no choice. If we don't lock them in, they'll overrun the facility, they'll spread out into the world, and we'll never be able to stop them." I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. The urgency in his voice was enough to keep me from questioning his words. If this was our only chance to stop the nightmare, then we had to take it. There was no turning back. Dr. Reynolds worked quickly, his fingers flying over the control panel. As he typed in commands, the screens flickered to life, showing maps of the facility, the creatures' movements, and the security lockdown protocols. But just as I thought we were making progress, the room seemed to shake with a loud thud. "They've breached the outer perimeter," one of the soldiers shouted from across the room. I felt the floor tremble beneath us again, and I looked toward the door. There was no escaping this. The creatures were inside, and we were running out of time. I turned to Dr. Reynolds, desperation creeping into my voice. "Can we lock them out? Can we stop them?" He didn't answer at first. Instead, his fingers danced over the keyboard, trying to access the lockdown system. "It's not enough. The creatures... They've adapted. The system might not hold, but we can try." Another thundering crash shook the facility, followed by the unmistakable sound of metal being torn apart. The creatures were inside the building now. They were closing in on us. "Activate the lockdown," Sheriff Baker ordered, his voice cracking with fear. Dr. Reynolds turned to face him, his expression grim. "It's too late," he muttered. "We've already failed." I looked around, feeling the weight of those words pressing down on me. We had failed. This was the end. But then, as if the world was collapsing in on itself, something happened. The monitors flickered again, and I saw something on the screen that sent chills down my spine. The creatures were no longer just attacking. They were communicating. Their movements were synchronized now, almost like they were ... waiting. "Get to the back door," Dr. Reynolds shouted, his voice frantic. Now, we turned and ran, but I could hear the pounding footsteps of the creatures behind us, their growls growing louder, closer. We didn't have much time. The back door was the only way out, and it was our last chance to survive. As we reached the back door, I heard it again, the sound of claws scraping against metal. The creatures were closing in on us faster than I could comprehend. We were almost there. The door opened, and we ran outside into the cold, harsh night air. But as I turned to look behind me, I saw it. The rift. It wasn't just a crack in the earth anymore. It was alive, pulsing with an unnatural light, like a living wound in the ground, spewing forth the creatures into the night. "We need to seal it," Dr. Reynolds said, his voice low. "We need to close the rift before it consumes everything." I looked around, but there was nowhere left to run. The rift was growing, and the creatures were pouring out of it. The only option left was to stop it, to destroy the source, once and for all. Sheriff Baker turned to face us, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding us. "We make our stand here," and just like that, we turned to face the creatures. Part 32. The last stand. Air felt like it was thick with something unnatural, a weight pressing down on us from every direction. The rift loomed before us, pulsating with a sickly glow that seemed to breathe with the earth itself. The creatures, those twisted shadows of nightmare, moved in droves, circling around us like wolves, closing in on their prey. The growls and shrieks filled the air, the sound of something ancient and violent awakening beneath our feet. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, my heart hammering in my chest, but it wasn't enough to drown out the sheer terror that gripped me. We were surrounded, and every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. But we couldn't. This was the final battle, the one we'd been running from since we first stepped into the nightmare of Pine Hollow. "Ready?" Sheriff Baker's voice broke through the chaos, his words harsh and steady. I looked at him, and there was no doubt in his eyes. This was the end, and we were going to face it head-on. Dr. Reynolds was by his side, his face pale but determined. He had been working toward this moment for years, but now, as we faced the monsters and the rift, I could see a flicker of fear behind his usual stoic expression. He wasn't just afraid of the creatures, he was afraid of the unknown, of what would happen if we failed. The rift wasn't just a crack in the earth anymore. It was something more, something that could not be fully understood. It was alive, and we were about to enter the heart of it. But we had no choice. We had to stop it. We have to close it. Dr. Reynolds muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. If we don't, this will spread everywhere. The creatures will continue to evolve. They'll destroy everything. I could see the fear in his eyes now, but it was mixed with something else, a grim determination. We were standing on the precipice of something much bigger than any of us, and the only option left was to fight. As the creatures closed in, Sheriff Baker raised his weapon, aiming it into the distance. "We fight or we die," he said, his voice cold but resolute. I took a deep breath, gripping my gun tightly, my palms sweaty against the metal. We didn't have much time. The rift was pulling the creatures toward it, and we had to act fast. I glanced at my mum, who was standing beside me, her face drawn, her eyes wide with fear. She didn't say anything, but I could see the same determination in her eyes. We had come this far. There was no turning back. "Let's make sure we go down fighting," Sheriff Baker said, giving us one last glance before turning toward the rift. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. The same edge I felt in my chest, in the pit of my stomach. We had one shot at this. One. If we failed, Pine Hollow, the creatures, and everything we knew would be lost forever. The creatures were close now, their grotesque forms twisting through the darkness, their black eyes locked onto us. They were not animals anymore. They were something far worse, something we couldn't fight with bullets or weapons. They were the embodiment of the land's curse, and we were its final target. Dr. Reynolds stepped forward, pulling a strange device from his bag. It was small, metallic, and glowed faintly with a sickly green light. "This is it," he said, his voice barely audible. "If we place this at the heart of the rift, it should sever the connection, but it'll be dangerous. The creatures will fight back. They won't just let us close it." I nodded, my pulse quickening. "Let's do it." We moved toward the rift, but before we could take another step, one of the creatures lunged at us, its claws swiping through the air. I fired instinctively, the gunshot deafening in the quiet of the night. The creature staggered back, but it didn't fall, it only roared, a horrible, ear-splitting sound that echoed through the woods, signaling the others to attack. The ground beneath us shook again, and the rift seemed to pulse with a life of its own, the air growing heavier with each passing moment. The creatures were on us now, their twisted forms charging forward with an inhuman speed. Sheriff Baker opened fire, but the creatures were fast, too fast to be stopped. "We need to get to the center," Dr. Reynolds yelled, pushing us forward. We fought our way through the creatures, but they were everywhere. Their claws scraped against the walls, and their shrieks filled the air. I fired again, but it wasn't enough. It never was. Finally, we reached the heart of the rift. It was a large, pulsating mass, the size of a small building. The device in Dr. Reynolds' hand began to glow brighter, its light cutting through the darkness. "Now," Dr. Reynolds shouted. He pressed the device into the ground, and a high-pitched hum filled the air, vibrating through the earth beneath us. The rift shuddered, the light inside it flickering violently as the creatures screeched. In agony, for a moment, everything was still, and then the earth cracked open beneath us. Part 33. The abyss opens ground trembled beneath us as the device in Dr. Reynolds' hand hummed, the air growing thick with a low, resonating pulse. I could hear the creatures around us, their growls shifting from fury to confusion, as if they sensed something was changing. But even in the heart of this chaos, there was a feeling of inevitability, like we had just crossed a point of no return. The air seemed to crackle with energy, a suffocating presence that pressed down on my chest with every passing second. And then, the rift exploded. The light that had been pulsing from the tear in the earth erupted into a blinding flash. blinding us all for a moment. The screeches of the creatures outside intensified as the ground split wider, the rift pulling apart as if the very earth was being torn in two. I could feel the pull, a heavy force drawing me toward it, but I dug my heels into the ground, trying to resist. The walls of the facility groaned in protest, the structure shaking violently as if it were being torn apart, along with the land itself. "Get back," Dr. Reynolds shouted, his voice nearly drowned out by the roar of the rift's explosion. He grabbed my arm, pulling me away from the widening chasm that threatened to swallow everything in its path. Sheriff Baker was already several steps ahead, moving quickly toward the extraction point, but it was too late. I turned, only for a split second, but it was enough to see the creatures, dozens of them, pouring from the rift. Their twisted forms were now even more grotesque, their bodies changing, adapting to the chaos of the rift. Their limbs stretched unnaturally long, their teeth sharpened into jagged, bone-like structures. Their eyes, once empty and soulless, now seemed to glow with an eerie, unnatural light, like they were being fueled by the very force of the rift itself. "We can't outrun them," I screamed, my voice barely audible over the deafening noise. "We need to close it. We need to destroy it now." "We can't," Dr. Reynolds said, his voice strained. "We've triggered something much worse. The creatures are adapting. The rift, it's not just a tear in the earth anymore. It's a doorway, a portal to something older. It's feeding them." I felt a chill run down my spine at his words. A doorway to something older. I had always known there was more to the land than we could understand, but hearing it from Dr. Reynolds, hearing the fear in his voice, it was enough to shatter any remaining hope. "We need to move," Sheriff Baker said, his voice tight with urgency. "There's no stopping it now. We need to reach the extraction point. We need to get out, before they overwhelm us." Dr. Reynolds nodded, though his face was pale, his eyes flicking toward the rift, as if he could feel the pull of the creatures reaching out for him. "We have to escape. It's the only way." We ran, the sound of the creatures' footsteps behind us growing louder. The walls of the facility were collapsing, the sound of metal tearing and concrete cracking echoing in every corner. The rift was opening wider, the creatures now fully aware of our presence. They were moving faster, their eyes tracking us with every step we took. I glanced back as we reached the door to the extraction point, and for a moment I thought I saw something, a shadow in the rift, something far larger than the creatures that had been chasing us. It was almost as if the rift itself had birthed something even more terrifying, something that had been lying dormant, waiting for this moment. "Go, now," Sheriff Baker shouted, his voice hoarse. We didn't hesitate. We ran straight for the extraction point, the door to the chopper waiting for us. As we reached it, I felt something slam into my back, pushing me forward into the door. The force of the blow knocked the air from my lungs, and for a moment, everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was already inside the chopper. I could feel the wind whipping around me, the sound of the rotors above deafening. The door slammed shut behind me, and I turned to see Sheriff Baker, Dr. Reynolds, and my mum all huddled together in the back of the chopper. The soldiers around us were already taking their seats, their weapons raised as they scanned the area. We were escaping, but the terror wasn't over. It was only just beginning. I turned to Dr. Reynolds, my heart racing in my chest. "What now? What happens to them?" Dr. Reynolds didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the monitors, his fingers tapping over the controls in rapid succession. "We need to destroy the rift. We need to sever the connection completely, before it spreads any further." I nodded, even though I wasn't sure what that meant. The creatures were still out there, still hunting, and we weren't safe yet. "We'll be safe once the rift is closed," Dr. Reynolds muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. But I knew better. The rift had already begun to change the world, and closing it wasn't enough. "We're never going to be safe," Sheriff Baker said grimly, his voice filled with resignation. "Not with what we've unleashed." And with that, the chopper soared into the night sky, leaving the burning remains of Pine Hollow behind us. But even as we ascended, I couldn't shake the feeling that the nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun. Part 34. The waking darkness had no time to celebrate our escape. The rift, although partially closed, was still alive, its pulsating glow cutting through the darkness. We had only delayed the inevitable. The creatures outside, once confined to the woods, were now breaking through the walls of the facility. Their growls, shrieks, and scratching were deafening. And as we huddled inside the chopper, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't just running from monsters. We were running from something older. As the helicopter soared into the night sky, the world below us grew smaller. Pine Hollow was now a smoldering ruin, the woods consumed by the creatures that had been unleashed. But it wasn't just the creatures we had to fear. There was something more, something dark, buried beneath the land for centuries. Dr. Reynolds sat next to me, his eyes glued to the monitors. I could tell he was still processing everything that had happened, everything he had been a part of. The eerie calm that had always been his shield was now cracking. His hand trembled as he fiddled with his equipment, trying to make sense of the data streaming through the screens. But there was no sense to be made of it. Not anymore. Dr. Reynolds, I asked, my voice trembling. What really happened? In Pine Hollow, what are they? His gaze flicked to me, and for the first time, I saw the terror in his eyes. They're not just creatures, Alex. They're manifestations of something far older. The land, the earth itself, it's not just a place, it's a presence. And it's alive. It feeds off of us, off our fear, our actions, our very existence. I felt my stomach churn at his words. So, everything, the creatures, the land, the rift, it's all connected. Dr. Reynolds nodded grimly. The creatures were never meant to be controlled. They were meant to be a tool, a weapon. But when the land began to feed off of them, they became more than that. And now the land itself is awakening. Awakening. The word struck me like a blow. Is there a way to stop it? To stop the land? I asked. Dr. Reynolds turned away from me, staring out the window at the dark expanse below. We may have sealed the rift for now, but it's far from over. The land is alive, Alex. It doesn't just want to kill, it wants to consume. Suddenly, the chopper jerked to one side, the heavy gust of wind pulling us off course. I turned to look out the window and saw something that made my blood run cold. The trees below were moving, but not in a natural way. They were twisting, stretching toward us, like giant, skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. It was as if the very earth had risen up against us, enraged by the disturbance we had caused. I turned back to Dr. Reynolds, my eyes wide with horror. What is happening? What are we seeing? It's not just the creatures, he said, his voice low. It's the land reacting. We've disturbed something ancient, something that has been waiting for us to awaken it. The trees, the earth, not just part of the environment. They are the environment. And now, now it's alive. As if on cue, a terrible screech ripped through the air, the sound of thousands of claws scraping against the earth. The creatures weren't just attacking anymore, they were calling to each other. The air was filled with an eerie vibration, and the rift seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. We need to get to the facility, Dr. Reynolds said, his voice tight with urgency. We need to sever the connection. If we don't, everything is lost. Part 35. The Truth Beneath arrived at the facility in a desperate rush. The helicopter touched down with a violent shake, the blades whipping the air into a frenzy. The soldiers disembarked first, their weapons raised, scanning the area for any signs of movement. But the world around us had shifted. There was a new danger now, something we could not have prepared for. The creatures weren't the only threat. The land itself was reacting, shifting, alive in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. As we moved deeper into the facility, Dr. Reynolds continued to lead us, his steps faster now, more frantic. We need to act quickly, Dr. Reynolds muttered, his voice strained. The land is changing. We don't have much time before it consumes us all. Why are we still here, Dr. Reynolds? I asked, my fear and frustration boiling over. What are we trying to do? What are you hiding from us? He turned to me, his eyes dark and haunted. We're trying to stop something that's beyond all of us. We can't destroy it. We can only contain it. We've been trying for years to understand the nature of the land's power. But the more we tried, the more it adapted. It's not just a curse, it's a force that's been feeding on us for generations. I could feel my blood run cold at his words. The land had been feeding on us, and we were just now realizing it. How do we stop it? Sheriff Baker asked, his voice cracking with exhaustion. Dr. Reynolds paused, his face tightening. We can't stop it, not completely. We can only delay it. We can only contain it long enough for it to settle back into the earth. But even then, we don't know if it will ever truly be gone. Before we could respond, A terrible sound filled the air. The walls of the facility groaned as something massive pushed against them from the inside. It was as if the very building was alive, shaking with the force of something primal, something ancient and hungry. "We're too late," Dr. Reynolds whispered. "It's happening." Part 36 would focus on the final stand, where the group faces the horrifying realization that there's no way to truly escape the nightmare. They'll confront the creatures and the forces behind the land's awakening, battling for survival in a final, desperate attempt to contain the threat. Let me know if you'd like me to continue from here. Part 36. The awakening facility trembled beneath our feet, a deafening rumble shaking the concrete walls. The very air seemed to warp, thick with a sense of inevitability. The creatures outside were no longer just trying to break in, were inside the building, pushing their way through the walls, their growls echoing through the corridors like a sinister symphony. We had failed. The land was alive, and we had disturbed it. Dr. Reynolds stood still, his face pale, his hands trembling as he stared at the monitor in front of him. The screens flickered erratically, displaying maps of the facility, the surrounding area, and the creatures' movements. But it wasn't just the creatures that were moving, it was the land itself, shifting, warping, as if it was reclaiming everything we had tried to control. "It's happening," Dr. Reynolds whispered, his voice filled with a cold dread. "The awakening, the creatures, the land, they're becoming one." I didn't know what to say. The weight of his words hung in the air, suffocating us. The land itself was alive, and now it was spreading. The creatures weren't just an accident, they were the harbingers of something much larger, something that had been waiting for centuries to break free. "We need to stop this," Sheriff Baker said, his voice shaking but resolute. "We can't just sit here and let it consume everything." Dr. Reynolds turned to face him, his eyes filled with something darker than fear. "It's too late for that," he said quietly. "The land is already consumed. What we thought we could control, what we thought we could contain, it's beyond our understanding now." The ground shook again, harder this time, and I could hear the unmistakable sound of claws scraping against the metal walls. The creatures were getting closer. They were already inside the facility, their growls growing louder with each passing second. "They're here," Dr. Reynolds said, his voice low, almost resigned. "They're coming for us. We couldn't run anymore. We couldn't escape." The facility, the building we had thought would protect us, was no longer a safe haven. It had become a tomb, a prison we had locked ourselves into, and now the creatures, the land, were closing in on us. Sheriff Baker raised his gun, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement. "We fight," he said, his voice firm. "We make a stand, and we don't back down." "We don't have a chance," I said, my voice trembling. "How do we fight something like this? How do we fight the land itself?" Dr. Reynolds turned to me, his face filled with sorrow. "We don't. We try to contain it. That's all we can do. But there's no guarantee it will hold. The creatures are only the beginning. The real threat is in the earth beneath us. The earth beneath us." It sounded insane, but it made sense. The creatures weren't just living in the woods. They were born from it. They were the land's extension, a manifestation of something ancient, something that had been waiting for the right moment to emerge. "Where do we go from here?" Sheriff Baker asked, his voice tight with frustration. Dr. Reynolds didn't answer immediately. He walked toward the control panel, his fingers flying over the buttons, but the screens were flickering wildly, the data coming through distorted and unreadable. The room felt colder, like the building itself was rejecting us, pushing us toward something we couldn't see. "We need to reach the core," Dr. Reynolds said, his voice strained. "The source, it's the only way to stop it." "The source?" I asked, confusion creeping into my voice. "What do you mean? What source?" "The rift," Dr. Reynolds said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The creatures there, connected to it, the land, the presence beneath us, it feeds them, and in return they spread its influence. The only way to stop this is to sever the connection. But how do we do that?" I asked, feeling the walls close in on me. Dr. Reynolds looked at me, his eyes dark and filled with the weight of everything he had been through. "We go to the heart of it, the heart of the rift. We destroy it, and we sever the bond between the creatures and the land. If we can destroy the source, we stop them from spreading." The walls shook again, and I could hear the creatures outside, their screeches and howls growing louder. We didn't have time. Whatever the heart of the rift was, it wasn't something we could control. It was something far worse. And yet, it was our only hope. "I'm with you," Sheriff Baker said, his voice filled with determination. "Let's finish this." Dr. Reynolds nodded. "We have to hurry. The creatures are already inside, and once they get to the source, we won't have a chance." With that, we moved forward, stepping into the darkened hallway. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the growls of the creatures filled the space around us. We could hear them now, closer than ever, moving quickly through the building, their footsteps pounding the floor. We reached the main chamber of the facility, the place where it all started. The air was thick with a strange, oppressive energy, and the walls seemed to pulse with the force of something unseen. In the center of the room, I saw Itherift. It was bigger now, much bigger than before. The crack in the earth had expanded, and the creatures were pouring out of it. There, twisted forms moving in waves. They weren't just coming for us, they were coming for everything. The world itself was being consumed, and the rift was the source of it all. Dr. Reynolds stepped forward, his eyes locked on the rift. "We have to destroy it," he said, his voice low but filled with urgency. "We have to stop it now, or it will never end." Part 37. The heart of the rift room felt like it was closing in on us. The walls, once sterile and solid, now seemed to tremble, as though the entire building was alive, reacting to the rift in the center of the room. The air grew heavy, thick, with an oppressive energy that seemed to suck the very breath from my lungs. The creatures, those twisted, inhuman monstrosities, were pouring out of the rift, their grotesque forms skittering across the floor, their dark, soulless eyes glowing with hunger. I could feel the terror creeping up my spine as I glanced at Dr. Reynolds. His face was pale, but his eyes were locked on the rift, his expression one of grim determination. "We have to do this," he muttered under his breath, more to himself than to anyone else. His hand was shaking as he fumbled with the device he had been carrying, the one he said would sever the connection between the creatures and the land. But I could already hear the creatures' growls growing louder, their claws scraping against the floor as they moved toward us. The sound was deafening. The rift was already consuming everything around us, and it was only a matter of time before it consumed us too. Sheriff Baker stepped forward, his eyes scanning the room, his hand gripping his weapon tightly. He didn't look afraid, he looked resolute. "We can't wait any longer. Whatever that thing is," he said, his voice steady, "we have to stop it before it spreads." Dr. Reynolds nodded grimly, his fingers quickly typing in a series of commands on the device. "This is it," he said, his voice shaking. "If this doesn't work, we'll be sealed in here with them. We won't get out alive." The rift pulsed, again, the energy in the room intensifying. I could feel the temperature drop, the very air turning cold and suffocating. The walls seemed to bend with the weight of the creatures closing in on us, their growls growing louder, more desperate. Mom clutched my arm, her face pale with fear. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. I could feel her fear radiating off her. We both knew that there was no escaping this. Whatever was happening, whatever we had unleashed, it was beyond us. We had no control. The only thing we could do was survive long enough to stop it. Dr. Reynolds turned to face us, his expression hardening as he raised the device in his hand. "Everyone, stay back. This may be our last chance." I took a deep breath, my pulse racing in my chest. We didn't have much time. The creatures were almost upon us, their claws scraping against the floor as they moved faster than anything I'd ever seen. But I knew Dr. Reynolds was our only hope. This was it. If he couldn't stop the rift, if we couldn't close it, Pine Hollow would be the first, but it wouldn't be the last. With a sharp click, Dr. Reynolds activated the device. A pulse of energy shot out from it, illuminating the room in a brilliant flash. The creatures recoiled, their bodies twitching as the energy from the device slammed into the rift, causing it to tremble. The rift began to shrink, slowly, as if the earth itself was resisting. "It's working," Dr. Reynolds whispered, his voice strained. "But we don't have much time. The creatures, they're adapting." I glanced at the creatures as they began to charge toward us. They moved with unnatural speed, their grotesque forms twisting, their claws outstretched. The rift may have been shrinking, but they weren't going to stop. They were closing in on us faster than I could react. "We have to go," I shouted, but Sheriff Baker was already ahead of us, firing into the advancing horde. The creatures hissed, their bodies writhing as the shots hit them, but they didn't slow down. They were relentless. They kept coming, faster, stronger, not leaving until this is finished. Dr. Reynolds yelled, his hands working furiously at the device. I could hear the creature's growls growing louder, the sound of their claws scraping against the floor shaking me to my core. I turned to look at Mum, but her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. She didn't say anything. She just held on to me tighter, as if by doing so, she could somehow anchor me to the world that was slipping away. The rift began to shrink faster. Now, its pulsing glow flickering as the energy from the device built to a crescendo. I could feel the ground beneath us vibrating with the force of it, as if the very earth was about to explode. The creatures were almost upon us, their growls deafening in the tight space. But Dr. Reynolds didn't stop. He kept pushing the device, harder, his eyes locked onto the rift as he muttered something under his breath, a prayer or a curse. I couldn't tell, and then, it happened. The rift closed with a violent snap, a burst of light so bright it was almost blinding. The creatures let out a horrific scream, their bodies writhing as they were sucked back into the closing tear in the earth. But it wasn't enough. The ground shook, the facility groaning under the pressure, and I realized, too late, that the rift had closed but the creatures hadn't been sealed inside. They were everywhere. Part 38. The echoes of the past ground shook again, but this time it wasn't from the creatures outside. The rift had closed at least. We thought it had, but something was still vibrating through the earth, as though the land itself was breathing. The facility groaned under the strain, and I could feel the walls closing in around me, like they were alive. The air had grown thick again, a feeling of unease settling in our stomachs. We weren't safe. We did it, Dr. Reynolds said, his voice shaking. We closed the rift, but there was no triumph in his voice, no relief. His hands trembled as he slowly lowered the device, eyes wide with fear. His usual confidence, the cold and calculating exterior that had guided us through the worst, was gone. Now, all that remained was uncertainty. But why does it feel like we've only made it worse? I asked, my voice hoarse. Mom was silent, still holding my hand tightly. Her face was pale, her eyes darting around the room as if expecting something to leap from the shadows at any second. We're not out of danger yet, Sheriff Baker said, his voice hard, but I could hear the doubt in it. The creatures may have been drawn back into the rift, but something else is happening. I can feel it. There's still something out there, something bigger. Dr. Reynolds didn't respond right away. He was staring at the monitors, his fingers, rapidly typing commands, but nothing seemed to be working. The screens flickered and distorted, as if the very power in the facility was being drained, as if the rift was fighting back, refusing to close completely. The hum in the air grew louder, a constant, deep vibration that seemed to resonate in my chest. That's it, Dr. Reynolds muttered, his eyes flicking toward the monitors. It's not over. I felt a chill run down my spine. What do you mean? The rift is closed. The creatures are gone, right? He shook his head, his face pale. No, the rift might be closed, but it's not the only source of power here. We've been using the wrong approach. The creatures, the land, the rift, they're all connected to something much deeper. We've been trying to stop the symptom, not the cause. I didn't understand. What cause? What are you talking about? Dr. Reynolds pointed toward the screen. The land itself, the rift, it, not just a tear in the earth. It's a doorway, yes, but it's also a manifestation of something older, something buried beneath us. We've been tracking it for years, trying to control it, but we never understood its true nature. Suddenly, the floor beneath us rumbled again, and this time it wasn't just the walls groaning. It was the shifting. The hum grew louder, like the world itself was trembling in anticipation. It's not just the rift, Dr. Reynolds whispered, his eyes wide with realization. The land itself has been infected, and now it's awake. I could feel the air grow colder as the weight of his words sank in. The creatures, the land, the rift, it was all part of something ancient, something alive, something that had been waiting for this moment to awaken. And now, we had unknowingly triggered its full force. What do we do? I asked, my voice tight. We can't just keep running from it. We have to sever the connection to the land, Dr. Reynolds said, his voice trembling. The only way to stop this is to destroy what's at the heart of it. The creatures are part of it, but the true power is buried beneath the earth, and it's growing stronger. Suddenly, the facility shook with a violent tremor, and I could feel the ground beneath us cracking. The walls groaned again, louder, This time, as if the very building was collapsing under the weight of the land's awakening. "We're not going to make it," I said, my voice breaking. "We might," Dr. Reynolds said, his voice filled with grim determination. "But we have to act fast. There's a way down an old access tunnel. It leads to the heart of the facility, where the power is concentrated. If we destroy that, we can stop everything." I felt a knot form in my stomach. "And what happens if we fail?" Dr. Reynolds didn't answer. He didn't need to. We didn't have much time. The creatures were no longer just outside. They were inside now, pouring through the walls, their growls growing louder with every passing second. The facility was collapsing around us, and the world outside had become a battleground between the creatures and the land itself. "Get to the tunnel," Dr. Reynolds ordered, his voice cold but commanding. "Move, now." We sprinted down the hall, the sound of the creature's claws scraping against the walls echoing behind us. The floor shook beneath our feet as we moved, the rumbles from the earth growing louder with every step. I could hear the heavy breathing of my mother behind me, her footsteps frantic, but she didn't hesitate. We had to survive this. The tunnel door was up ahead, a rusty steel barrier blocking our path. Dr. Reynolds quickly pulled out a keycard, swiping it against the scanner. The door clicked open, revealing a dark, narrow passage. We didn't hesitate. We ran inside. The air was thick with dust and decay, the smell of old machinery and damp earth hanging in the air. The walls were lined with ancient pipes and cables, remnants of the old facility that had been abandoned for years. But now, it wasn't just the machinery that was alive. The very earth itself seemed to pulse with power, the walls vibrating. With each step we took, "We're almost there," Dr. Reynolds said, his voice low, his eyes scanning the shadows around us. "We need to reach the core before it's too late." But as we moved deeper into the tunnel, something changed. The ground trembled more violently, and I could hear something else now, whispers, soft, unintelligible voices, carried on the wind, filling the space with a low hum. I turned to look at my mum, but she didn't look at me. She was staring at something ahead, her face pale, her lips trembling. "What is it?" I whispered, but she didn't answer. Ahead, in the distance, I saw something, a faint light, flickering in the darkness. It wasn't the light of a lantern or a flashlight, it was something else, something unnatural. "That's it," Dr. Reynolds said. "We've reached the heart." We rushed forward, but as we neared the source of the light, I felt the ground crack beneath us. The walls of the tunnel began to bend and warp, the light flickering violently. "Run!" Dr. Reynolds shouted, but it was too late. The walls collapsed, and I felt myself being sucked into the darkness. Part 39. The final awakening. The ground beneath our feet shattered as the tunnel collapsed, and the last thing I saw before everything went dark was the eerie, flickering light ahead. It wasn't the light of safety or hope, it was something darker, something ancient. It pulsed like a living thing, drawing us in, pulling us toward it, as if it had been waiting for us all along. I felt the weight of the earth crashing down, debris falling all around us as we scrambled to move, to survive. My mother's grip on my hand tightened, her fingers cold, shaking. She was terrified more than I had ever seen her, but she didn't let go. We reached the heart of the tunnel just as everything around us seemed to crumble. The walls trembled violently as the light ahead grew brighter. The whispers I had heard earlier grew louder, becoming distinct, maddening voices. Their words were unintelligible, but they weren't just in the air. They were, in my mind, crawling beneath my skin, like the very land itself was speaking to me. I had no idea what we were about to face, no idea how we were supposed to destroy the source, but standing there, with the tunnel collapsing around us, the creature's growls and roars growing louder, I knew one thing. We had come too far to turn back. Dr. Reynolds was at the front, his eyes wide with fear and determination. His hands were shaking as he pulled out the device, the one he had said would sever the connection to the land. But as he raised it, something happened. The walls of the tunnel began to glow. The light from the heart pulsed with an unnatural energy. The ground beneath us buckling as the rift inside the earth tore open wider. "We're too late," Dr. Reynolds muttered, his voice tight with panic. "It's too strong. We can't stop it now." Before I could respond, the ground beneath us shook again, and this time, it wasn't just the earth cracking, it was something else. The tunnel walls began to split apart, and from the cracks came a flood of black, writhing tendrils, like dark roots, searching for something to latch onto. Mum gasped, her face going pale as the tendrils slithered toward us, their twisted forms moving faster than we could react. I tried to move, tried to drag her away, but the ground was giving way beneath us. "Dr. Reynolds, do something," I screamed, but he wasn't listening. His eyes were fixed on the heart of the rift, his face contorted in something between awe and terror. "It's not the creatures we need to stop," he said, his voice breaking. "It's the land. The land is waking up. This whole place. It was built to contain it, but we've only fed it. We've only given it power." Before he could finish, the tendrils surged forward, wrapping around us with terrifying speed. I tried to push against them, but they were too strong. I could feel their cold, alien touch as they tightened, pulling me back toward the rift. The light from the heart of the rift intensified, flooding the tunnel with a violent, blinding glow. The creatures outside were screeching in fury as they converged on the opening, but their noises began to drown in the chaos. All that was left was the roar of the earth itself, alive, hungry, and eager to consume everything in its path. And then, everything went black. Part 40. The final fade. Don't know how long we were in the dark. It could have been seconds, or it could have been days. Time seemed to stretch, to bend, like the very fabric of reality was warping around us. There was nothing but silence, the kind that presses against your eardrums, suffocating you. I felt as though I was floating, suspended between this world and whatever lay beyond. Then, slowly, the world began to return, but it wasn't the same world. The air felt heavier, thicker, with a strange, oppressive energy that was suffocating us. I blinked, trying to focus, but my eyes felt like they were being pulled into some kind of vacuum. I could feel the weight of something pressing against my chest, like the land itself had reached out to claim me. "Alex, .. I heard her voice, soft and distant. My mother, but it wasn't right. Her voice sounded far away, distorted as though it were coming from the other side of a thick wall. I tried to move, tried to call back to her, but my body wouldn't respond. It was like I was trapped in my own mind, unable to escape. And then, the darkness shifted. It wasn't like a blackout or unconsciousness. It was like the very world itself had been replaced, and the rift, the source we had tried to destroy, had taken hold of everything. The sound of rustling distant, but unmistakably reached my ears. It was like the earth itself was moving again. I couldn't see, but I could feel the presence of something in the air, something ancient, something hungry. The next thing I knew, the blackness cleared, and I was standing not in the tunnel we had just been in, but in some vast, open expanse. It was like standing at the edge of the world. The sky above was a sickly red, and the ground beneath my feet was blackened and cracked, as though the earth itself had burned. And there, standing before me, was the creature, the one from the woods. Its twisted, elongated form loomed over me, its black eyes glowing with an unsettling malice. But it wasn't just the creature, it was something more. It was a shadow of something larger, something that had merged with the land, with the very soil beneath us. I wanted to scream, I wanted to run, but I couldn't. I couldn't move, couldn't escape. "Alex," it spoke, but not in words. It thought to me. Its voice, though not heard by my ears, was all around me, in my mind, in my bones. "You've awoken me." My body shook, my breath came in short, sharp gasps, and the terror in my chest rose to a fever pitch. You were never meant to survive this," the voice whispered, a dark chuckle vibrating through my very soul. "I've been waiting for the right moment, the right souls to awaken me." And then, in that moment, I understood. This wasn't just about creatures. This wasn't just about monsters or a cursed town. It was about something older, something buried deep within the land of force that had been sleeping beneath the earth, waiting for the moment we'd stir it awake. And now, there was no stopping it. "You think you can contain me?" The voice laughed again. "You think you can destroy me? I am the land. The land is me. You cannot sever what has always been." I tried to move. I tried to scream for help, but it was too late. The creature, or whatever it was now, moved closer, its claws reaching toward me. I felt the coldness of its presence as it loomed above me, its shadow stretching like it was trying to devour everything in its path. Suddenly, I felt a jolt of pain, sharp and intense, like something had pierced through me. I looked down, but I couldn't see anything, just the blackened cracks in the earth stretching beneath my feet, the world spinning around me. I couldn't breathe. The very air felt thick, like it was drowning me. Do you understand now? The voice said, its presence overwhelming. You are nothing but a fleeting moment. And I will last forever. And then, the world shattered. I woke up, gasping for air, but I was no longer in that strange alien place. I was back in the facility. The same walls, the same sterile, cold air. But it was different. The land, the rift, had followed me. Back. The rift hadn't closed. It had just moved. The world was no longer the same, and we were no longer safe. I could hear the growls again, faint but unmistakable. They were inside the facility, clawing at the walls, waiting to break free. Dr. Reynolds was by my side, his face pale, his eyes wide with realization. "We've failed," he said, his voice hollow. "It's too late." I looked around, and the others were still there. Mom, Sheriff Baker, the soldiers still alive, still fighting. But we all knew, we all felt it. The land was alive, and we had awoken it. There was no escaping it. The nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun. End of story. Well, today's story has come to an end, but did those mysterious events really finish? Be careful, for the darkness might still linger somewhere out there. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more terrifying ghost stories. Sleep well, if you dare.